Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Anupama Gulati. Anupama, who lives with her husband and 2 children, was born and raised in Dehradun, but her parents and brother were often worried because they could not reach her on the phone. Since her family used to call her frequently, this loss of contact worried her family. Anupama's brother, Sujan Pradhan, decided to call Anupama's husband, Rajesh Gulati, whom she had been married to since 1999, to ask about his sister. However, every time Sujan Pradhan called, Rajesh would say that Anupama was either busy or had gone on a business trip. This went on for about 2 weeks. During this time, Anupama contacted her brother via email, informing him that she was completely fine and very happy with her husband and 2 children. This reassured her family. However, when they continued to be unable to reach Anupama on the phone, her parents asked Sujan Pradhan to go to Dehradun and meet Anupama. On December 12, 2010, when Sujan Pradhan went to Rajesh's house, Rajesh greeted him unfriendly and said that Anupama was elsewhere and he could not meet her right away. On the other hand, Sujan Pradhan tried to break into Rajesh's house, leading to heated arguments between the two. However, Rajesh did not allow Sujan to enter the house. When Sujan asked Rajesh about Anupama, Rajesh did not provide a satisfactory answer. Sujan decided to go to the nearby police station and filed a missing report for his younger sister, Anupama Gulati. In the report, he also said that he was trying to enter the house but was prevented by Rajesh. The police found the case suspicious and went to Rajesh Gulati's house. When Rajesh saw the police with Sujan, Rajesh tried to remain calm. The police asked Rajesh about Anupama, but Rajesh did not answer directly and tried to distract them. However, the police soon discovered Rajesh's cunning and decided to conduct a full search of the house. During the search, the police noticed a closed room. When the room was opened, there was nothing unusual except a large freezer. The police found the presence of a freezer very strange because such appliances are commonly used in large shops and restaurants. The police wondered why Rajesh would buy such a large freezer for his small family, but he just kept quiet. The police decided to open the freezer to investigate and found many small black bags inside. When they opened one bag, they discovered pieces of meat and then took out some more envelopes. The surprise came when they found a human skull in one of these envelopes. Rajesh Gulati then confessed to the police that the pieces were the body of his wife, Anupama. He broke down in tears and narrated the story. After his confession, the police arrested Rajesh and took him to a local court. There, he was remanded in custody for 5 days. During further investigation, the police discovered a surprising piece of information. Rajesh explained that he had met Anupama at Delhi University, where they both studied and got to know each other. They soon developed feelings for each other and started falling in love. Initially, they kept their relationship a secret from their families, but later decided to go public and asked for permission to get married. Both families agreed and they had a grand wedding in 1999. After marriage, Rajesh's career grew rapidly, and he found a job in a large company in the US. Rajesh and Anupama moved to the US so that he could work as a software engineer. They were living comfortably now, and they had bought a house, which meant that their finances were stable. However, after a few months, Anupama started feeling lonely because Rajesh often went to work every day and she had to stay home alone. During her boredom, Anupama often contacted a close friend of Rajesh's. Later, Rajesh found out that Anupama had become close friends with a close friend of his. Rajesh felt uncomfortable knowing that Anupama and his friend were talking on the phone frequently. This caused many arguments between them. Rajesh asked Anupama many times to stay away from his friend, but she did not listen. This made the situation worse in their home. However, in 2006, Anupama gave birth to twins, and the birth of a daughter and a son brought happiness and harmony to the family. While living in the US, Rajesh and Anupama enjoyed a fairly comfortable life. However, that was completely disrupted in 2007 and 2008 when the US fell into an economic recession, leaving many unemployed. Rajesh, after trying to keep his job for a while, also fell into unemployment. To sustain the family, Rajesh used his savings, but as the situation could not last forever, the savings eventually ran out. At that time, Rajesh had no choice but to sell his house in the US. After selling the house, Rajesh decided to return to India with his family. However, Anupama continued to keep in touch with Rajesh's friends over the phone, and this caused a major argument that led to a conflict between Rajesh and Anupama. The arguments escalated and the couple took the matter to the family court. The court eventually decided that Rajesh would provide Anupama with 20,000 rupees per month to meet their expenses. Thereafter, Rajesh and Anupama lived together in a rented flat for a few months in a place called Governor. After some struggle, Rajesh got a job in a big company in Kolkata, about 990 miles away from his home. For the sake of his job, Rajesh had to leave his wife and 2 children and start a new life in Kolkata. In Kolkata, around 2009, Rajesh met a married woman who was suffering from an unhappy marriage. Her husband was not good and often abused her. When Rajesh heard the story of this woman, he felt sympathy for her and gradually, the two became close friends. Gradually, their friendship developed into love. After some time, they decided to marry each other secretly at a temple in Kolkata, without informing any of their family or friends. Rajesh returned to his normal routine after his second marriage. He maintained regular contact with his first wife, Anupama, went to work daily, and kept his second marriage a secret from everyone. However, Anupama noticed changes in Rajesh's behavior and suspected that he was involved with another woman in Kolkata. But she was unaware that Rajesh had actually remarried. The couple continued to argue over this issue and their relationship became so strained that Anupama started thinking about divorce. However, Rajesh successfully convinced Anupama and they did not go through with the divorce. But when Rajesh failed to pay Anupama, the court ordered maintenance of 20,000 rupees. These financial disputes finally reached a boiling point on October 17, 2010, when Rajesh and Anupama had a huge argument. Rajesh becomes enraged and violently pushes his wife, Anupama, causing her head to hit the corner of the bed. As a result, she starts bleeding profusely. Initially, Rajesh is shocked, but moments later, he lifts a pillow from the bed and uses it to smother Anupama. However, unbeknownst to Rajesh, Anupama is already deceased. Rajesh then frantically searches for a place to hide his wife's body, aware that his children will soon return home from school. With time of the essence, he moves Anupama's body to the second bathroom in the house and locks the door. As he tries to devise a plan to dispose of the body without arousing suspicion, his children arrive home from school and ask about their mother. Rajesh fabricates a story, telling them that their mother suddenly left for Delhi. Rajesh's children believe their mother, Anupama, had gone to visit their grandparents in Delhi. However, Rajesh had other plans. While the children were in school, he went to the market and purchased several items, including a deep freezer, an electric chainsaw, a stone cutter machine, and small black envelopes. When Rajesh brought these items home, he hid them in a separate room. When the children left for school the next day, Rajesh began the gruesome process of dismembering Anupama's body with an electric saw. He closed all the doors and windows to block out the noise. According to Rajesh's statement, Rajesh cut Anupama's body into 72 pieces. He then placed each piece into black bags and carefully stored the bags in the deep freezer to prevent the smell of the deceased from spreading. This process took Rajesh several days to complete. During this time, Rajesh continued to deceive Anupama's parents and brother by making excuses whenever they called, unaware of the horrific events unfolding at his residence. Rajesh took steps to cover up Anupama's disappearance by making excuses to their neighbors and telling their children that their mother had traveled to Delhi. He also had access to Anupama's email account, which allowed him to maintain communication with Sujan Pradhan, Anupama's brother, making it seem as though Anupama was still alive. Following the murder, Rajesh took the children on a weekend trip to Mussoorie in Uttarakhand. During the trip, he would collect 2 or 3 envelopes from the fridge containing pieces of Anupama's body and dispose of them in the forests or gorge along the way. This revelation shocked everyone, and the police began searching the areas where Rajesh claimed to have disposed of Anupama's remains. After an extensive search, the police found some black bags containing body parts in the surrounding forests and gorge. Based on this evidence, Rajesh Gulati was arrested and sent to jail. Rajesh Gulati's twin children were sent to Delhi to live with Anupama's brother, Sujan Pradhan. A court had granted Sujan official custody of the children on March 7, 2011. Rajesh Gulati's father, Satyapal Gulati, appealed this decision but was unsuccessful. On November 3, 2012, the court dismissed his appeal and confirmed that Chari would retain custody of the children. Evidence provided by the police revealed the horrific nature of the crime. Rajesh Gulati had brutally murdered his wife and then cut her body into 72 pieces. After a 7-year trial, Rajesh Gulati was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment on September 1, 2017. He was also ordered to pay a fine of 1.5 million rupees. The court ordered that 70,000 rupees of the fine would go to the state treasury, while the remaining amount would be deposited in the names of the twin children. The children would have access to this money only after they came of age. Rajesh Gulati was sentenced in a lower court, but he appealed this decision in a higher court in 2018. However, there has been no ruling on his appeal yet, resulting in his prolonged imprisonment. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lindsay Wilson. Lindsay Wilson was a kind-hearted and empathetic person who wanted to love and be loved. Her primary mistake was failing to recognize her partner's true nature in time. As time passed, she struggled to escape from their codependent relationship. Lindsay's story began when she discovered she was pregnant at 17. Raised in a loving family, she wasn't emotionally unprepared, but her boyfriend's abandonment scared her. Lindsay was aware that motherhood would bring physical and financial challenges. She was relieved to meet Mitchell, who seemed like a gentleman, attentive and caring, and didn't shy away from her despite her pregnancy. However, his true nature would eventually be exposed, leading to devastating consequences. Mitchell fell in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her, raising her child as his own. He worked hard to provide for her, even taking extra hours to ensure she wanted for nothing. However, their 5-week-old relationship shocked their parents, who felt they were rushing into marriage. Despite their doubts, they got married in August 1995, surrounded by Lindsay's family and only a few of Mitchell's relatives. Lindsay's family noticed that Mitchell was overly sweet and polite, but they kept their misgivings to themselves. The newlyweds had a dispute on their wedding night, which left a bad impression on Lindsay's relatives. Mitchell's behavior became increasingly controlling and violent. Lindsay sought psychological support and reported the abuse, but her husband would answer the door and phone calls, preventing her from contacting her social worker. The social worker, concerned for Lindsay's safety, reported her missing in February 1999. The police visited the address but were unable to speak with Lindsay, and Mitchell claimed she had left him for another man. The search for Lindsay began, and her relatives reported that they last saw her on December 11th, appearing happy and healthy. Her mother had tried to reach her on December 24th, but was told by Mitchell that she had left with friends accused of infidelity. Detectives were puzzled by the fact that no one had expressed concern about Lindsay's well-being for 2 months. It was clear that Mitchell had isolated her from the outside world, including her close relatives. Although they had previously struggled to communicate with her, it was possible for Lindsay to go unnoticed for a while. However, this didn't mean her family wasn't worried. The news of her disappearance was alarming to everyone. They all described Lindsay as a modest person who didn't drink, and Mitchell had restricted her contact with friends and acquaintances. There were many inconsistencies in Mitchell's story, which contradicted his character profile and raised the investigators' suspicions. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell would simply let his wife go, and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. The situation merited a thorough investigation, so the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances, trying to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where they lived. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted by the time Lindsay's disappearance was reported. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person, on December 15th at the local post office, sending several letters and postcards. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day, despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea together, and during their brief conversation, Lindsay slipped a note into her sister's hand, asking her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and forgot about it in the whirlwind of days. Regrettably, she couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again for several months. Investigators tried to hold on to any information they could, suspecting that she was no longer alive due to her prolonged absence. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence, but the more they learned about their life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. They had married shortly after their wedding and moved away from their parents, renting an apartment in Southport. Later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the new baby's joy was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment, he could be joking and laughing. The next, he became unbalanced and aggressive. She tried to maintain a fragile peace at home, but didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. Loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations, with Mitchell kneeling, begging for forgiveness, and professing his love. For a while, it seemed that peace had returned to the family, but then the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening, and they advised her to return home and end her suffering. It was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control, forbidding his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricting her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Lindsay confided in her older sister about her suspicions of her husband Mitchell's infidelity. She shared an incident where a woman came to their home looking for him and was shocked to learn he was married. This led to an argument that escalated into physical violence. From then on, physical abuse became a regular part of their life as Mitchell sought to control Lindsay and maintain his reputation. Mitchell began to isolate Lindsay from her neighbors, friends, and family, despite her efforts to secretly maintain contact with them. Lindsay stayed in the marriage because Mitchell provided a comfortable life, financially supporting her and their child. However, when she discovered she was pregnant again, she knew she didn't want more children and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When Mitchell found out, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. Lindsay packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family was relieved, and she proceeded with the pregnancy termination as planned. Over time, she began to miss Mitchell, who frequently called and begged her to come back. Mitchell eventually convinced Lindsay to give him another chance, and initially, everything seemed to go well. However, his severe anger outbursts continued, and he destroyed their apartment, leading to them being evicted. They had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. Their relationship continued to deteriorate, with Mitchell frequently leaving home for days or weeks at a time. Lindsay grew accustomed to his behavior, but eventually filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. She realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own and reached out to a local charity that assisted women in difficult situations. With their help, Lindsay found subsidized housing in another city and took measures to distance herself from Mitchell, including obtaining a restraining order. She began to rebuild her life, started a journal, and sought therapy. Despite her precautions, Mitchell discovered her phone number and began calling her, demanding to see their son. Lindsay, who had been feeling lonely, reunited with Mitchell despite her relatives' and friends' disapproval. They began living together again, which shocked those who cared about her. However, Mitchell remained unpopular with them, and they eventually stopped communicating with Lindsay, believing she had returned to an abusive relationship. This decision ultimately proved fatal. Initially, Mitchell was cooperative during the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance. However, as the case gained media attention, he shifted his focus and became a public figure, inviting journalists into his home. His numerous media appearances seemed insincere, with some viewers noticing a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents and detectives viewed Mitchell as the prime suspect, but the lack of direct evidence hindered their efforts. Searches were conducted at their home and throughout the area, but Mitchell continued to appear in the media, even declaring that Lindsay's family would one day apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mitchell sent a postcard to the lead investigator with a pack of hair dye, mocking the detective and displaying his arrogance. The investigation team responded by hinting that Mitchell was not who he claimed to be, tarnishing his reputation. In February 2000, it was discovered that Mitchell had been forging Lindsay's signature to receive social benefits, which indirectly implicated him in her disappearance. Despite the financial motive, Mitchell's popularity worked in his favor, and many supporters argued that he, as a single father, deserved financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring charges, but they eventually accused Mitchell of fraud. He was found guilty and sentenced to community service. However, Mitchell's popularity began to wane as the forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared suspicious. The number of angry comments increased, and Mitchell eventually snapped, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. The case might have remained unsolved had it not been for a chance discovery on June 1, 2000, when a parkgoer noticed their dog acting strangely near a roller coaster. Human remains were uncovered, and forensic examination confirmed they belonged to Lindsay Key. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay was a victim of a brutal crime. The focus shifted to finding the perpetrator, and on June 7, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. After 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down and confessed to dismembering and murdering Lindsay on December 15, 1998. Mitchell told authorities that Lindsay had informed him of her decision to file for divorce earlier that day, which enraged him and led him to attack and strangle her in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, using a gap under the door to conceal any odors. Realizing he needed help to dispose of the body, he enlisted the assistance of his brother Elliot, a butcher, who was initially hesitant but eventually persuaded. While the children played in the next room, Mitchell and Elliot dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, Mitchell showed no remorse or empathy, instead seeming proud of his actions and stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led authorities to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs, although her head and one hand were never recovered. Forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay, leaving no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001, with Mitchell being found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. A court-appointed psychiatrist noted that Mitchell showed signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother Elliot received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Wilson family when one of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. As of 2017, Mitchell Key has been eligible for parole, but his lawyers have been denied 3 times. The Wilson family, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released and have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. In an interview, Mr. Wilson mentioned hearing rumors that his former relative had attempted to end his life and added that he sincerely hopes the murderer will try again and succeed this time. He also commented on the prevalence of domestic Stockholm syndrome, where victims often adapt to their abusers throughout their lives, even when their families come to their aid. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Augustina M. Winkelried. Augustina M. Winkelried was born on June 6, 2001, in Esperanza, where she grew up in a big. As the baby of the family, she naturally received extra attention and affection. People who knew her described her as outgoing, kind-hearted, and always wearing a bright smile. On January 12, 2019, Augustina's father drove her to a friend's house, where a group of about 6 friends were meeting up. They planned to go to Teo's, a nightclub with a bowling alley, later that night. Augustina had already made plans to sleep over at her friend's house, and her father knew about these plans. Augustina left a club in the afternoon and went home. Later that night, she asked her boyfriend Noel to join her at the club, but he declined, saying he was tired. Augustina and her friends had a great time at the club, dancing and enjoying the music until 5 a.m., when they decided to leave. However, she ran into another group of friends and decided to stay longer. At 5:40 a.m., a surveillance camera showed Augustina leaving the club, carrying her phone. She then went to a nearby fast food stand, where she waited in line, got her order, and chatted briefly with someone she knew. After that, she headed towards the road. Since the friend's house where she was staying the night was close by, Augustina decided to walk. It was getting light, and she didn't seem concerned about her safety. There were no sidewalks, so she walked along the side of the road. Augustina's whereabouts on the night in question are unclear, but video footage shows she walked steadily despite wearing high-heeled platform shoes. The only moment of instability was when she approached the driveway, which is understandable given that it's an unpaved road with rocks. However, Augustina failed to arrive at her friend's house or her own home, which was unusual because she always kept her parents informed of her location. But on this occasion, when morning came, her parents didn't receive a text from her saying she had arrived safely. Concerned, Augustina's father, Daniel and Winkelried, contacted the police and began searching for his daughter on his own. After starting their investigation, police officers went to Teo's club to interview potential witnesses and review the available surveillance footage, since they knew Augustina had spent the entire night there. Meanwhile, a friend of Augustina's, Brian, reached out to her father, Daniel, and told him that he had seen Augustina outside Teo's club around 6 a.m. Brian was driving by when he noticed Augustina standing on the side of the road, talking to the driver of a silver car that had pulled over next to her. Brian continued driving down the road, but quickly pulled out his phone and called Augustina to check on her. He asked if she was all right and if she needed a ride home. Augustina replied that she was fine. Augustina accepted Brian's offer for a ride, saying she was headed to a friend's house. Brian decided to wait for her at a nearby gas station, which was just a few hundred meters away from where he first spotted her. He would fill up his car while waiting. However, 15 minutes passed, and Augustina failed to appear at the gas station. Brian then went to look for her, but she was nowhere to be found. Despite trying to contact her, Brian was unsuccessful as Augustina did not answer her phone. At the time, Brian didn't think much of it, assuming that Augustina had simply gone straight to her friend's house and forgotten that he was waiting. The main clue in this situation was the silver car. Although Brian couldn't identify the exact brand and model, he described it as fairly old. The man in the driver's seat may have been the last person to see Augustina before she disappeared. Police didn't rule out the possibility that he was involved in her disappearance. They tracked her cell phone signal and found that the last recorded signal was from a tower near the Taos Club. The search team focused on the vacant lots and fields around the club, which is on the outskirts of town. A nearby gas station was the only business with surveillance cameras along the road Augustina was walking on. Daniel, Augustina's father, reviewed the footage to see if his daughter had passed by the gas station. Since her friend's house was nearby, it's likely that Augustina would have walked past the gas station. The attendant showed Daniel the footage after he explained the situation and asked for help. The camera had recorded footage from that morning, but the attendant almost lost his job as a result. Later, the gas station owner fired the employee for letting someone watch the security footage without permission. However, when the townspeople found out, they boycotted the gas station, which led the owner to rehire the employee and apologize. Daniel reviewed the gas station's footage and couldn't find his daughter on it. It seemed Augustina never made it there. But the footage did show an old silver car, the same one Brian had described earlier, passing by the gas station around the time Augustina was walking on the road. The car was a Renault, and Daniel identified its owner as Pablo Trianfini, a 39-year-old garbage collector who lived nearby. Pablo had no prior convictions but had been on the police's radar several times. The first incident occurred in 2017 when Trianfini's ex-wife reported him to the police for physical abuse, leading to a court order that banned him from approaching her. He was arrested again in the same year for violating this order. After reviewing the surveillance footage, the police identified the silver car. However, upon learning that Daniel had already seen the video, they worried that a violent attack might occur and rushed to Pablo Trianfini's residence. When they arrived, they found a crowd gathered outside, shouting, "Where is Augustina?" The crowd dispersed after the police arrived, and someone informed the officers that Trianfini was inside the house. Trianfini had peeked out, but upon seeing the hostile crowd, he retreated back inside and locked the door. The police did not have sufficient reason to forcibly enter the house, so they requested a search warrant. While waiting for the search warrant, the police cordoned off the house to prevent Trianfini from escaping. Around midnight, an officer checked the yard and discovered that Pablo Trianfini had died. The officer rushed to assist, but it was too late, and Trianfini was deceased. Such a turn of events made Pablo Trianfini's involvement in Augustina's disappearance clear. However, after searching his house and car, the police still found no evidence. Trianfini attempted to deflect further suspicion by using a rope, but its purpose was unclear. As the police searched Trianfini's house, his neighbor approached them. The neighbor stated that earlier that day, Pablo had borrowed a shovel, claiming he needed to dig for earthworms for a fishing trip. About 30 minutes later, Feeney returned the shovel and made a comment that struck his neighbor as odd. He thanked the neighbor and said, "Thank you, I don't know if I'll ever see you again." Witnesses reported seeing Feeney leave his house multiple times on Sunday, riding his bicycle while carrying a shovel. This behavior suggested that Augustina might no longer be alive. On Monday, January 14, 2019, a search operation began at dawn, aided by drones and police dogs. At 9:15 a.m., Augustina's partially clothed body was found approximately 500 meters away from Taos Club, hidden in a ditch with dense vegetation. The forensic investigation revealed that Augustina had fiercely defended herself, resulting in defensive wounds on her hands and her attacker's skin under her fingernails. DNA analysis confirmed that Pablo Feeney was the perpetrator. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. The circumstances surrounding Augustina's entry into Feeney's car remain unclear. It is unknown whether she was coerced or accepted a ride voluntarily. With both parties now unable to share their accounts, the truth may never be fully known. A search of Feeney's phone did not yield any evidence of prior communication or connection with Augustina. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in Fort Worth, Texas, where she spent her entire life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alexandra and Giovanna, and the three were incredibly close. After her biological father left the family when she was very young, her mother, Juanita, remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted Elizabeth and her sisters, treating them as his own. Elizabeth had a warm and loving relationship with her stepfather, who supported her in all her endeavors. She was a diligent student and dreamed of becoming a doctor one day. In high school, she met Rudolph Arellano, who was almost 8 years older than her, and the two began a romantic relationship. Although her parents were initially hesitant about their age difference, they trusted Rudolph and allowed the relationship to continue. At 16, Elizabeth married Rudolph and soon had 4 children, 3 sons, and a daughter. However, she didn't plan to give up her career aspirations to become a full-time mother. She pursued her childhood dream, graduating from medical school and working as a paramedic, with hopes of furthering her education to become a doctor. Elizabeth was a kind and pious woman, raised in a Christian tradition. She was devoted to her children and instilled in them the importance of loving and helping others. Those close to her described her as a caring and responsive person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, her marriage to Rudolph appeared to be strong and happy, but beneath the surface, it was struggling. Rudolph's jealousy and controlling behavior had been a problem for years, and over time, it became increasingly unbearable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth finally reached her breaking point after another jealous outburst from her husband. Taking her children with her, she moved back to her parents' house. Rudolph attempted to reconcile, but Elizabeth was exhausted from tolerating his anger and didn't want her children to witness the constant fighting. So, she found the courage to file for divorce. Shortly after, Elizabeth mysteriously disappeared. According to her friends and family, she had been in good spirits and had decided to go out with colleagues to a local club after work to take her mind off her marital problems. On Friday evening, April 15, 2016, 28-year-old Elizabeth went out with her friends to a fun spot. She had a great time dancing, but didn't drink alcohol because she had driven her car to the club and planned to drive home. After a successful night out, Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th, parking her car outside her house. She then phoned a friend she had been with at the club to let them know she had arrived home safely. However, despite saying she was home, Elizabeth never actually entered the house. The next morning, her mother Juanita was frantic with worry when she discovered Elizabeth was not at home. She knew her daughter had planned to spend the evening with friends, but she should have been back long before. It wasn't like Elizabeth to disappear without a word, and the fact that her car was parked outside only added to the mystery. Clearly, Elizabeth had returned from the club, but where was she now? When Juanita approached the car, she was shocked to find it unlocked with the key still in the ignition. Her daughter's purse and phone were on the seat, indicating that something was seriously wrong. Juanita immediately called the police to report her daughter, Elizabeth, missing. The police were hopeful they could quickly solve the case, given the leads they had. There was no sign of struggle or blood in the car, suggesting Elizabeth might still be alive. However, to move forward, they needed to piece together a detailed timeline of Elizabeth's movements that evening. To start, the police interviewed Elizabeth's friends and colleagues, who confirmed the time she left their gathering and later spoke with her when she arrived home safely. The police also found several calls and messages from Elizabeth's ex-husband, Rudolph, on her phone, which showed he had tried contacting her multiple times that night. The police went to Rudolph's house to investigate his whereabouts on the previous evening and night. Rudolph claimed he had spoken to his ex-wife, Elizabeth, the night before, and she had promised to bring their children to him for the weekend. However, she stopped answering his calls, leading him to believe she had changed her mind. The police found Rudolph's alibi suspicious. He said he had been at a local bar with a friend that evening and returned home around midnight. While his friend and other patrons confirmed he was at the bar, no one could verify where he went after leaving. Since Rudolph lived alone, there was no one to confirm he went home, making it difficult for the police to rule him out as a suspect. The police were intrigued by Rudolph's calm demeanor, given that his ex-wife was missing and they were in the process of divorce. Despite being married for many years and Elizabeth being the mother of his children, Rudolph seemed unaffected by her disappearance, which only added to the suspicions surrounding him. On the night a young mother vanished, a fisherman phoned emergency services to report a bizarre event. He was sitting alone on a bridge that spans an interstate highway, fishing, when at around 4:30 a.m., he witnessed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver throw a large object, resembling a person, into the water. From his distance, he couldn't see details, but it seemed like something heavy and bulky was tied to the person. The darkness and strong wind on the bridge prevented him from seeing the car's make and number or hearing any sounds. Shortly after, a second witness came forward, who was walking his dog near the bridge. Although he didn't see what happened on the bridge, a distressing scream caught his attention, followed by something large falling from the bridge and a subsequent splash, then silence. Based on the witnesses' accounts, the police decided to investigate the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers discovered a body with a large concrete block tied to its neck with a rope. The body of Elizabeth Arellano, a missing woman, was found drowned. A passerby and a fisherman's testimonies helped locate her body, which would have likely gone undiscovered due to the strong tidal currents that prevented it from floating. An initial theory suggested that Elizabeth might have voluntarily ended her life due to family problems. However, this was quickly dismissed as it contradicted the witness account of someone throwing her into the water. Her relatives also confirmed that Elizabeth had big plans for her life and would never abandon her children and parents. The forensic medical results and a man's testimony, who heard Elizabeth's desperate screams as she was thrown off the bridge, revealed that she was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck. She subsequently suffocated to death. The brutal murder of Elizabeth, a mother of many, has left investigators baffled as to who could have committed such a heinous crime. Robbery has been ruled out as a motive, as none of her belongings were taken. Instead, it's possible that the killer may have stalked her from a club she visited or lay in wait for her at her home. Elizabeth's ex-husband, Rudolph, has denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he was at home sleeping on the night of the murder. However, investigators are not convinced as he has no alibi and his behavior has raised suspicions. At his ex-wife's funeral, Rudolph appeared grief-stricken, saying he wished he could have died in her place. He even helped set up a charity to raise funds for her farewell ceremony, which seemed to convince his sister of his sincerity. However, when questioned again after the funeral, Rudolph's demeanor had drastically changed, as if nothing had happened. A review of CCTV footage has revealed a new lead. A car similar to Rudolph's was seen leaving Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. on the night of her murder. The neighbor remembered seeing the car parked near the deceased's house on the road. Similarly, another neighbor saw the car parked nearby. Significantly, it was discovered that the car later drove towards the bridge where the victim was thrown. This detail sparked many questions. When the investigation examined Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions multiplied. The records showed that he made multiple calls, first near Elizabeth's workplace and then near his in-laws' home. Additionally, he sent several messages to his ex-wife, trying to find out when she would return, but received no response. It appears that he had been tracking her movements and eventually decided to wait for her return at her parents' house. The police gathered sufficient evidence to arrest Rudolph as the main suspect and take him in for further investigation. A crucial witness in the case was Rudolph's eldest son, who shared vital information with the authorities. When shown the rope found around his mother's neck, the boy recalled seeing it in his father's backyard, where he had played with it earlier. Additionally, the boy identified a piece of concrete from their garden, which had appeared after the fence was replaced. Significantly, small fragments of this concrete were discovered in the trunk of Rudolph's car. The investigation revealed that Rudolph had waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home, abducted her, and prevented her from entering the house. Rudolph Arellano kidnapped his ex-wife by forcing her into his car, where he had already prepared rope and concrete in the trunk. He then drove to a bridge, intending to kill her without being noticed. However, his plan was foiled when her body was later recovered from a lake. Arellano was arrested 10 days later, but initially denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he was at home on the night of the murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence and eyewitness testimony against him, Arellano maintained his innocence. However, faced with the possibility of the death penalty, he took his lawyer's advice and confessed to the crime. He cooperated with the investigation in hopes of reducing his sentence. It wasn't until January 2019 that Arellano pleaded guilty in court and provided a detailed account of how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife, the mother of their 4 children. The courtroom drama was intense, with Juanita, one of his daughters, fainting upon hearing his confession. His other daughters, Alexandra and Giovanna, were devastated, calling their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph showed no remorse or guilt for his actions, speaking about the murder in a cold and detached manner. He did not apologize or provide a motive for the crime. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite considering the sentence too lenient, Elizabeth's family chose to forgive Rudolph, as they did not want to be consumed by hatred. Her parents and sisters took on the responsibility of raising Elizabeth's children. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Amber Belkin. Amber Marie Belkin was born on December 6, 1981 in San Antonio. As an only child, her parents described her as energetic, ambitious, and responsible. For almost 3 years, Amber worked as a manager at the video game store. On January 29th, she was scheduled to work another shift. The store was set to open at 10 a.m., but Amber always arrived at 9 a.m. to prepare. Part of her routine involved taking the previous day's earnings from the safe and depositing them at the adjacent bank to avoid accumulating large sums of money in the store. On a January day, Amber arrived at work around 9 a.m. as usual. The store, part of a large international chain, was supposed to open at 10 a.m. However, by noon, Amber still hadn't opened the store or deposited the money, which raised concerns. In addition, she wasn't answering phone calls. The regional manager asked the manager of another San Antonio store, Mariano Rivera, to investigate why Amber hadn't deposited the money and why the store remained closed. When Rivera arrived, he saw a white car similar to Amber's parked outside. The store entrance was locked, and he couldn't see anyone inside. After knocking on the door without getting a response, he left. About 2 hours later, Rivera returned to check on the store again. This time, he spotted Amber's assistant, Brandon, through the window. Rivera knocked on the door, and Brandon let him in. Rivera asked Brandon if he had seen Amber, but Brandon said he hadn't. Brandon mentioned that he had just arrived and noticed something strange. Money, CDs, and work documents were scattered all over the floor. Rivera entered the back room and made a horrifying discovery. The lifeless body of Amber lay on the floor, face down, with a plastic bag over her head. Forensic experts later determined that the cause of her death was strangulation. Rivera immediately called 911, and the police soon cordoned off the store. Detectives found that Amber had not delivered money to the bank as she normally would, and the store's safe was empty, suggesting that a robbery had taken place and gone wrong. It's possible that the robbers stumbled upon Amber and decided to eliminate her as a witness. Based on Amber's schedule, the crime was determined to have occurred between 9 and 10 a.m. Unfortunately, the store lacked surveillance cameras, which could have greatly aided the investigation. As a result, the police had to rely on other clues. First, detectives interviewed Mariano Rivera and Brandon Beal, the two individuals who stumbled upon the body. They recounted how they arrived at the store and the circumstances surrounding their discovery of Amber's lifeless body. Store management reported to the authorities that the safe had been robbed of approximately $2,000 and several items were missing, including a few video game CDs and 3 or 4 PlayStation consoles. The total damages to the store amounted to $6,000. The police also questioned employees from neighboring establishments, but their efforts yielded no valuable information, as no one claimed to have seen or heard anything unusual. Meanwhile, as the police investigated the crime scene, news of the incident spread rapidly throughout San Antonio, and the parking lot in front of the store became flooded with media representatives. Amber's father, Randy Belkin, was watching the news when he heard about the incident. The address of the store where the crime occurred caught his attention, so he immediately got in his car and drove there. When he arrived, he spoke to a detective who broke the devastating news that the victim was his daughter. This event had a profound impact on Randy, dividing his life into 2 distinct periods, before and after. Soon, Amber's mother, Lelia, arrived at the store. She looked into her husband's eyes and understood the unthinkable. Their only child was gone. The detectives examined the crime scene and concluded that the criminal had escaped through the back door, which explained why no one had seen him. Their main finding was that the criminal must have been familiar with the store's schedule, knowing that the money was taken to the bank between 9 and 10 a.m., and that this particular store didn't have surveillance cameras. This level of knowledge suggested that the criminal was likely a former or current employee of the company. The initial suspect in Amber's disappearance was Brandon Beal, her store assistant. He was familiar with the store's operations and was already on the premises when a manager from another location arrived to check on Amber. Brandon had arrived at work to find the store still closed, despite it being several hours past the opening time. Using his key, he entered the store and relocked the door. Upon entering, he noticed signs of a struggle, but curiously, he didn't investigate the back room to check on Amber's whereabouts or well-being. Further investigation revealed that Amber, as the store manager, had been dissatisfied with Brandon's performance and wanted him fired. She had confided in her mother that Brandon had a short temper and struggled to fulfill his job responsibilities. The question detectives sought to answer was whether Brandon's disagreements with Amber could have driven him to commit a crime. After receiving a warrant, officers searched Brandon's car and home in an effort to locate the stolen CDs and PlayStation consoles from the store. However, they did not find any of the missing items. During the interrogation, Brandon explained that he arrived at the store around 2 p.m. and was surprised to find it still closed. He claimed that he let himself in using his key as he didn't think Amber could be inside. Upon seeing the mess, he assumed the store had been robbed and was shortly followed by the manager from another location. Brandon also admitted that he was unaware of Amber's intention to fire him, although he acknowledged that they often disagreed on certain issues. His girlfriend and parents corroborated his alibi for the morning of the crime, and after successfully passing a lie detector test, he was cleared as a suspect. Almost a month had passed since Amber's death, but the police still had no new leads. The detectives were worried that the case would go cold. Desperate for a breakthrough, Amber's parents reached out to the public through the media, pleading with anyone who knew anything about the incident to come forward. They offered a $100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest, with $95,000 of that amount provided by Amber's employer. Flyers with her picture were posted throughout San Antonio. Yet despite these efforts, there was no progress for the next 7 months. Then, suddenly, a police station received a crucial call. A man identifying himself as Joe told the detective handling Amber's case that he knew who was responsible for her murder. Joe claimed that 22-year-old Giovanni Rivera was the killer. When the detective asked why he thought so, Joe explained that he and Giovanni had worked with Amber at the same company. On the day of the crime, Giovanni had called him, asking if he wanted to take part in a robbery. Joe revealed that the targeted store, Choice, was no accident. Giovanni had chosen it because it lacked surveillance cameras. The detective asked Joe if he had accepted the offer and participated in the robbery, but Joe denied it. If everything said so far is true, the police's initial theory that the crime was committed by someone familiar with the store's schedule is likely correct. The detective asked Joe to come to the police station to make a formal statement, but Joe refused. However, 2 days later, Joe voluntarily went to the station and maintained his innocence in the robbery. During the questioning, Joe detailed how Giovanni Rivera first discussed robbing a store. Joe claimed that Giovanni never mentioned harming Amber. But about a month after Amber's death, which had received widespread media attention, Giovanni confessed to Joe that he was responsible for her death. Joe explained that he didn't immediately report Giovanni because he feared for his safety. The $100,000 reward for providing crucial information might have encouraged Joe to come forward sooner. Joe claimed that his growing sense of guilt eventually outweighed his fear, prompting him to contact the police. Although Joe's testimony alone wasn't enough to secure an arrest warrant for Giovanni Rivera, it led the detective to call Giovanni in for questioning. Interestingly, Giovanni Rivera and Mariano Rivera, the manager who discovered the body, are simply namesakes with no family connection. During a conversation with the detective, Rivera claimed that Joe was lying and asserted he was not involved in any criminal activity. However, at a certain point, he declined to answer further questions, and the police were forced to release him. As the officers pondered how to bring him to justice, Giovanni relocated to Laredo, Texas, with his family. Being a border city with Mexico, there was a significant risk that he would cross the border and disappear. In the absence of substantial evidence, detectives were unable to take any action, and the case remained stagnant for months. Fortunately, help arrived unexpectedly at the end of June 2008, nearly a year and a half after Amber's tragic death. It was Veronica, Giovanni's wife, who reached out to the police. In her distress call, she revealed that her husband had attacked her, threatening her and their kids with a pistol. Moreover, she courageously implicated Giovanni in Amber Belkin's murder. The detective in charge of the case traveled to Laredo to interview Veronica in person. During their meeting, Veronica shared her regret over marrying Giovanni, citing that she had made a poor decision. She had become pregnant with his child while still in school, and her family had pressured them into getting married. However, after the wedding, Giovanni's true nature unfolded. He transformed into a tyrant. Veronica alleged that if she refused his advances, he would restrain her with duct tape. She also disclosed that when Giovanni was first called to the police station, he returned home agitated and abruptly instructed her that they needed to relocate to Laredo. That same day, they hastily packed their essentials and left San Antonio behind. Veronica realized that if her husband was exonerated, they wouldn't have to relocate. One day, she mustered the courage to ask Giovanni directly if he was responsible for Amber Belkin's death, and to her horror, he confessed to taking Amber's life. Stunned, Veronica demanded to know why he did it. Giovanni's response was that their family desperately needed the money to pay the rent. When Veronica subsequently asked for a divorce, Giovanni became violent, forcing her into a car and driving her to a remote location. There, he pulled out a pistol and threatened her. He then coerced her into performing sexual acts against her will. Afterward, he removed her from the car, handed her the gun, and instructed her to kill him. Veronica categorically refused, prompting Giovanni to threaten retaliation against their children and relatives if she didn't comply. Veronica pleaded with Giovanni to consider the fate of their children if they were left parentless, and her words seemed to have an impact. That evening, they both returned home, but the next morning, Giovanni threatened to vanish. As soon as Veronica drove away, she contacted the police and reported her husband's admission of guilt. The authorities obtained an arrest warrant for Giovanni, but he managed to escape across the border into Mexico. It took 6 weeks of searching before he was finally apprehended at a relative's residence. The Mexican authorities agreed to hand him over to the U.S., but only on the condition that the prosecutors would not seek the death penalty. During questioning, Giovanni confessed to the murder of Amber Belkin. He explained that, as soon as Amber opened the store door, he followed her, wearing gloves and a mask. Amber recognized him, and he told her he was in financial trouble and needed money. He forced her to open the safe, and when she attempted to reach the phone, he bound her hands with duct tape. Amber panicked, screaming, and Giovanni covered her mouth, asking her to remain quiet. Realizing he had gone too far, he placed a plastic bag over her head, asphyxiating her until she stopped breathing. He then stole the money, some CDs, and PlayStation consoles before driving away. After a prolonged and challenging process, the district attorney's office finally agreed to a plea bargain. In April 2010, Giovanni Rivera was subsequently sentenced to life in prison, with the stipulation that he must serve at least 30 years behind bars before he can be considered for parole. Amber's loved ones and friends vowed to do everything within their power to guarantee that he remains incarcerated for the rest of his life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Lamu. Lamu was born in 1990 in Nyawa, Tibet, Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. The family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lamu had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them. Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains to find rare herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lamu was well versed in these plants and had a deep love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok, where she posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she wasn't chasing fame. Instead, fame found her. Her audience adored Lamu for her smile, purity, and childlike spontaneity. Lamu never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings, and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. She never used makeup or filters, and her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches, and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lamu's subscriber count grew, and not only locals, but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offering warm words, expressing gratitude for her work, and asking for photos. Lamu was not proud of her fame, but was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. Lamu's personal life was marred by her abusive husband, Tong Li. For many years, she suffered at his hands, enduring beatings and humiliations, but tried not to show her deep unhappiness. Tong Li was born in 1990 in Sichuan province, China, into a simple and modest family. His parents adored him and spoiled him from an early age. At 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, earning little but keeping all the money to himself. This marked the beginning of his greedy, arrogant, and selfish nature. As a teenager, Tong began dealing in banned substances, stealing, and gambling, and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape poverty. At 15, he left home and joined a gang, engaging in illegal activities. Meanwhile, Tong's parents opened a successful spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. When the business took off, Tong returned home, offering to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives' hard work. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries and boasting to friends about his expensive items. He even claimed the store's success as his own, while his family worked hard daily. He maintained a separate under-the-table business with local criminals. Lamu and Tong met when they were 17. Tong was enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity, and courted her earnestly, giving gifts and promising to change for her. Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming. They developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. Tong proposed to Lamu when he turned 19, and she eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry, believing they were too young to start a family. Lamu moved into her mother-in-law's house, but soon, Tong started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife changed drastically. Tong became crude, self-centered, and aggressive, taking a portion of the store's earnings and spending all the money on his own needs. Lamu and her husband Tong's relationship started to deteriorate. They frequently argued, with Lamu urging him to change his ways, give up drinking, and stop associating with criminals. However, Tong refused to listen, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. Their home became a battleground with conflicts erupting daily. Even when Lamu became pregnant, the situation didn't improve. One day, Tong's behavior shocked Lamu. She declared she would return to her parents' home, refusing to tolerate his treatment. Her mother-in-law, who had witnessed the incident, intervened, scolding her son and telling him he had no right to treat Lamu that way. The mother-in-law convinced Lamu to stay, promising that the abuse would stop. Lamu believed her and gave her husband another chance, a decision she would later regret. The abuse continued, with Tong regularly becoming physically violent, only to apologize afterward, begging Lamu not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had changed, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave, Tong threatened to take their son away and harm her and her parents. Fearing for her safety, Lamu stayed. Their child became Tong's tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu kept her nightmare hidden from her relatives, including her close older sister. After her mother's passing in 2012, Lamu found herself managing her parents' household and caring for her elderly father and grandmother. She continued to climb mountains to gather herbs, using the time to escape her husband's wrath and find solace in her thoughts. In 2017, Lamu gave birth to a second son, but her relations with Tong remained strained. Her mother-in-law stopped intervening on her behalf. Around the same time, Lamu created a social media account, posting videos about local beauty, flowers, and herbs. She gained a large following who admired her work and knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine. Her online presence became an outlet for her to express herself and momentarily escape her difficult reality. Lamu kept her domestic violence a secret, never complaining to her audience about her situation. However, when her grandmother passed away in 2019, she posted a video expressing her grief. Her followers supported her, unlike her husband, who became furious and struck her. Lamu finally decided to leave her abusive husband in January 2020 after enduring another violent incident. She took her sons and moved back to her parents' home, filing for divorce. At first, she felt calm and confident, despite trying to hide a large bruise under her eye. However, the court's decision to divide custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with her and the older with her ex-husband, was a devastating blow. During the divorce proceedings, her ex-husband suddenly changed his tactics, romantically pursuing her again and proposing they start over and not break up the family. For a couple of months, he pretended to be a repentant man, giving her flowers, creating celebrations, helping around the house, and even joining her on trips. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, they were married. But the fairy tale ended soon after Lamu returned to her husband's house. He reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, brutally attacking her nearly to death within 2 weeks of remarrying. He snatched her phone, hurled it against the wall, and battered her mercilessly. Lamu fled the house, barefoot, and went to the police, seeking protection. However, they only took her statement and advised her to resolve the family conflict on her own. Lamu decided to hide in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Her enraged husband was ready to end her life, but didn't know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house, so he visited and began yelling, demanding to know where Lamu was. When her sister claimed ignorance, he struck her repeatedly, fracturing her cheekbone, eye socket, and nose. After the Lamu's sister filed a police report, Lamu's ex-husband was finally held accountable, but not arrested. During the second divorce proceedings, the court left both sons with the father, as the wealthy Lee family's influence proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains, recorded a video of herself singing and dancing, trying to relieve stress. However, her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. On the evening of September 14, 2020, Lamu started a live stream, chatting with her followers while dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. Suddenly, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. Lamu turned pale, frozen in fear, staring at the person entering. She jumped up, trying to escape, but the tripod with her smartphone fell, camera down. Viewers could only hear the heavy footsteps, the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls, and Lamu screaming for help. Her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell, followed by the click of a lighter and a piercing scream. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room grew louder. Followers were left stunned, refusing to accept that they had just witnessed a tragedy. It was not a prank, unfortunately. The worst had occurred. Tong had brutally exacted revenge on his ex-wife, Lamu, for leaving him. He rode a motorcycle to her house, bringing a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw Lamu in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door open. Lamu was caught off guard, barely understanding what was happening before she tried to flee. Tong prevented her escape, dousing her with fuel and wounding her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand the gravity of the situation as the flames erupted. Lamu's relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams were burning like torches, blocking the entrance. Miraculously, firefighters took about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and literally melted to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing, with a faint pulse detectable. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke. Despite her critical condition, Lamu desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma, and her condition was deemed critical. The city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering $1,000,000, a sum her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers, writing a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center, where she received the necessary care, and her condition was stabilized. At one point, it seemed she might recover. Tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, Lamu's heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. Tong was arrested the day after committing this heinous act. At the trial, his mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Tong guilty of deliberate cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death. Additionally, the court mandated his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tong attempted to appeal the verdict several times, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out and Tong Li was executed. 2 years after the tragic event that ended Lamu's life, her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in on the ground floor. Her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. The court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents, the Li family, who remained one of the wealthiest in the village and were believed to provide the children with better living conditions. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Tara Baker. Tara Baker was born on January 20th, 1977 in East Point, Georgia. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother later remarried. Tara had 2 brothers and a sister, making her the oldest of 4 siblings. From a very young age, Tara demonstrated a strong interest in the legal system and aspired to become either a lawyer or a judge. She would hold trials with her stuffed animals, make legal contracts with relatives, and frequently write letters to various politicians, including once complaining to the President of the United States that his speech had interrupted her favorite TV show. After graduating from high school, Tara attended Georgia College, where she graduated early in just 3 years, earning 2 bachelor's degrees in 1999. Tara then enrolled at the University of Georgia to complete her education. This university was one of the top law school schools in the country and was located in a small town called Athens, just a few hours' drive from her parents' home, making it the perfect choice for Tara. Instead of living in a dorm again after college, Tara decided to rent off-campus housing. She chose a house split into 3 separate rooms, with 2 other university students renting the other rooms. One of these students was someone Tara knew well from college. For some time, Tara worked at a prestigious law firm in downtown Athens, which allowed her not only to cover rent and other expenses, but also to gain valuable experience in her future profession. In January 2001, when Tara was 23 and in her second year, she spent a lot of time studying at the university library. The evening of January 18th was no exception, as she and her friend went to the library and spent several hours there. Her friend left for home around 7:30 p.m., while Tara decided to stay longer. At approximately 9:46 p.m., she called her friend from the library to check if she had gotten home safely and mentioned that she planned to head home in a few minutes. The next day, around 6 p.m., Tara's mother, Virginia Baker, received a phone call. At first, she thought someone was playing a prank on her because the caller identified themselves as a detective and asked if her daughter had ever been arrested, as they needed her fingerprints. Thinking it was a joke, Virginia hung up, but then she decided to call the Athens police station. To her surprise, they confirmed that she had indeed spoken to a real detective and informed her that there had been a fire at Tara's house. Still not fully understanding what was going on, Virginia asked to speak to her daughter, but the detective replied that they couldn't find her and that an unidentified body had been found in the house, which was why they needed Tara's fingerprints. The detective further explained that they had only been able to locate one of Tara's roommates, who was not home at the time of the fire, and the whereabouts of the other roommate and Tara were still unknown. Investigators believed that the body might belong to one of them. Virginia then asked to describe the room where the body was found, and the detective's response left her speechless. They said that the room was filled with antique stuff and that Tara had been collecting such items for years. Tara's family immediately drove to Athens, hoping it was all just a misunderstanding and that Tara was okay. When they arrived at the police station, they were kept waiting for a long time without any information. Several hours later, a detective finally informed them that the body found in the house belonged to Tara and that she had been murdered, not killed in the fire. The detective then said he was too tired to answer their questions before leaving, adding that Tara had left them a gift under her nails. Experts had found fragments of the perpetrator's skin, which might help identify him. Tara's relatives were left in a state of shock and despair upon receiving the news of her murder. Despite their pleas for more information, the police did not provide any further details. The family desperately tried to get some answers, but the detectives refused to share any information with them. Since then, the local police department has never contacted the family, and Tara's relatives had to persistently call and visit the station in a futile attempt to obtain any information. Eventually, they managed to piece together some of what had happened. Around 11 a.m. on January 19th, firefighters were called to Tara's address. After extinguishing the fire, they found a body inside, later identified as Tara Baker. Medical experts concluded that Tara had been murdered, her body showing signs of strangulation and stab wounds, and she had likely been assaulted. The fire had started after her death, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator had set it to destroy evidence. However, Tara's parents were never able to get the police to show them the medical examiner's report or provide detailed information about the murder. Tara's family also learned that many pieces of evidence might have been destroyed by the firefighters, which is not uncommon in such cases. Their primary goal was to extinguish the blaze and potentially rescue any survivors, and they couldn't have known that there was a murder victim inside. The family also discovered that the investigators likely didn't secure the house after finding the body, allowing anyone to approach or even enter the crime scene. As Tara's relatives gathered these pieces of information, they not only encountered the police's reluctance to keep them informed about the investigation, but also faced constant rudeness and unprofessionalism. At one point, they even started recording their conversations with the police and filed complaints against the local investigators, but this led nowhere. They eventually decided to conduct their own investigation and reached out to a well-known criminologist who agreed to help them. However, the local police department agreed to show him the case materials only on the condition that he would not share any information or findings with anyone outside the investigation, including Tara's relatives. The family hadn't been able to obtain Tara's death certificate for 10 years. It was only after writing to the state governor that they finally received the document. But even then, the detailed cause of death was not listed. It simply stated multiple injuries. Despite all this, the police did continue their investigation, although there were many questionable moments in their actions, which we'll discuss a bit later. When firefighters extinguished the blaze and discovered Tara's body, they called the police, realizing it was a murder. Investigators searched for evidence at the crime scene, but the room was severely damaged by fire and water. As the family later found out, some surviving items were never examined for fingerprints. The police were able to determine that Tara's laptop was missing from her room. Considering it was 2001, the laptop was quite a bulky piece of tech, yet no other valuable items were taken. This raised doubts about the robbery gone wrong motive. There were no signs of forced entry, leading investigators to believe that Tara might have known her killer and let them in voluntarily. Although the fire and firefighting efforts had damaged the crime scene so much that it was difficult to be certain, both of Tara's roommates were out of town that evening, so she was home alone. Establishing the time of death was challenging, so medical experts estimated a time frame from 10 p.m. when Tara left the library to 11 a.m. when neighbors called the fire department. The crime likely occurred closer to the morning hours since the fire didn't need much time to spread. The police also found witnesses who saw a middle-aged white man running down the street that morning. It was unusual that he was only wearing a t-shirt and jeans, given that it was winter. They soon discovered that there had been a phone call to Tara's university a few days before the murder. The university had a procedure for students or faculty to request student information like phone numbers. A man who sounded heavily intoxicated called and asked for Tara Baker's phone number, but only managed to write it correctly on the 8th attempt. While this was highly suspicious, the man's identity was never determined. At the time of her murder, Tara had a boyfriend who became a person of interest from the very beginning. He provided an alibi that was confirmed, yet the police were reluctant to remove him from their list of suspects, even after verifying his alibi. They treated him with suspicion, calling him and his parents in the middle of the night and demanding that he come to the station in another city to provide additional biological samples, answer questions, or undergo a polygraph test. It's worth mentioning that Tara's boyfriend had to identify her. He lived in another city and came to Athens immediately upon hearing about the fire. Although Tara's parents were already in town, the police asked the boyfriend to identify her. They brought him directly to the house, but he wasn't allowed inside. Instead, a police officer went in, took a photograph of the body, and showed it to him on the camera screen. Shocked, he said he couldn't be sure if it was Tara. He then mentioned that he had given her earrings, and if he saw them, he could be certain. The officer went back inside, removed the earrings from the body, and showed them to him. Only after that did the boyfriend confirm they belonged to Tara. The police soon focused their attention on another individual, a student who attended the same classes as Tara and had a troubling reputation. Several female students came forward, saying that he repeatedly asked various girls out on dates and often didn't take no for an answer. He had also asked Tara out multiple times, even though she had been telling him that she had a boyfriend. Some girls also mentioned that this person scared them with his creepy behavior and made them feel uncomfortable. Detectives began to investigate him, but they couldn't find any evidence linking him to the crime. At one point, they even asked Tara's friends to keep an eye on him, which was a quite controversial move, but it led nowhere. Another suspect was an attorney who worked at the same company as Tara. Talking to her colleagues, investigators found out that shortly before the murder, the man began acting quite strangely in their company. There was a close-knit group of employees who socialized outside of work pretty often, and at some point, this attorney suddenly quit their group. Moreover, just a few days before the incident, he told Tara that he wouldn't be able to attend her birthday celebration, which was scheduled for the day after the murder. On the morning of January 19th, before the fire started, one of Tara's colleagues decided to try and convince him to come to the celebration, since Tara considered him a good friend and she was hurt by his sudden decision. The colleague went to his office, but he wasn't there. Considering that his workday had already begun, this was strange, as he had always been present at the office in the mornings, but on that particular day, it wasn't the case. The colleague also checked his work schedule, thinking he might have meetings, but it was empty. He didn't show up that day, but the next day, he went to another colleague's house and behaved quite strangely. Many people who knew him suspected that he regularly used illicit substances, which could have explained his behavior, but there was more. The colleague noticed several fresh scratches on his neck. As we remember, skin particles from the perpetrator were found under Tara's nails, which meant that she had probably scratched her attacker. The attorney claimed he was scratched by a cat and denied any involvement in Tara's murder. However, when asked who he thought committed the crime, he acted quite oddly, starting to shout that it was her father, but provided no explanation to support this claim. Another weird thing was that the attorney suddenly resigned just a few months after the murder and left the state. It's unknown whether the police compared his DNA with the samples found under the victim's nails, as for all these years, there has been no information about whether these samples were even examined. Like with all other parts of the investigation, detectives didn't share any information, not even with Tara's relatives. The police later found out that the attorney was secretly dating two female colleagues from the company, despite being married. This could have explained his strange behavior and absence from work without apparent reasons. Both of these women also claimed they were sure he was using illegal substances. The police weren't able to find any evidence linking him to the murder, and eventually they stopped considering him a suspect. Detectives also looked into the employees of the maintenance company associated with the house where Tara rented a room. They had spare keys, which could have explained the absence of signs of forced entry, but they couldn't find any leads there either. Since then, there had been no significant progress in the case. The police continued to search for new suspects and witnesses, while keeping most details of the investigation in secret, insisting that releasing such information could harm their efforts. Over time, they received several more potential leads. One witness reporting seeing an African-American man outside Tara's house a few hours before the fire, and another mentioning seeing blood on a university classmate's notebook. Shortly after the murder, the police investigated both leads, but they didn't lead anywhere. Tara's parents raised $77,000 and offered it as a reward for any information that could help solve the case. Over the years, almost all detectives working on the case changed, but the new team continued their efforts to crack the case. However, there were no new breakthroughs. The main issue was the lack of evidence, as the fire and the firefighters' actions destroyed almost everything inside Tara's room that could have been of interest to the investigation. In 2020, 19 years after Tara's murder, a podcast emerged that shed light on her case. The podcast gathered all available information about the crime, including interviews with Tara's family and other people involved in the case. This sparked a renewed wave of interest in the case. The police department also took notice of the podcast, leading to increased communication between the new detectives and Tara's family. As a result, the police began working on the case more thoroughly, but there was still no progress. The podcast episodes dedicated to Tara aired for 2 years, significantly impacting the fate of the case. It became one of the reasons why Georgia's government came up with a bill aimed at reducing the number of unsolved cases in the state. This bill was named after Tara and another young woman from Georgia, Rhonda Coleman, whose murder remained unsolved since 1990. In 2023, the bill unanimously passed, and the governor of Georgia came to Athens to sign it, in the presence of the families of both victims. The law aimed to establish an unsolved cases unit within the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. It also empowered the families of the victims to request the police to review unsolved cases, re-examine evidence, and take other steps to solve them. As soon as the law was signed in 2023, such a unit was established, specifically focusing on Tara's murder. Detectives reviewed all available information and began examining the few pieces of evidence, utilizing modern DNA analysis tools. This went on for several months until May 13, 2024, when the police called a press conference. After 23 years since the murder, they announced that the perpetrator had finally been arrested. The culprit turned out to be a 48-year-old man named Edric Lamont Faust. During the conference, investigators didn't disclose how exactly they identified the suspect, only mentioning that modern DNA analysis tools and other biological evidence played a crucial role. They refrained from revealing all details to avoid compromising the ongoing legal proceedings, and only at trial would they disclose what evidence they have against Edric. In Edric's arrest documents, among other charges, he was accused of assaulting the victim, so his biological material could have matched the DNA sample from Tara's body. As we also recall, traces of the assailant's skin were found under the victim's nails, and it's possible that modern tools allowed experts to extract the killer's DNA from it. As for Edric, he likely should have been in the FBI database for a long time due to his extensive criminal record, including numerous arrests for various offenses. At the time of Tara's murder, he was 25 and living in the same city. However, police stated they couldn't find any evidence indicating the suspect knew the victim, suggesting Edric might have broken into her home or convinced her to let him in under some pretext. Detectives also revealed that Edric had never been a suspect in the case and only came under their radar a few days before his arrest, thanks to innovative DNA analysis methods. At the moment, Edric remains in jail awaiting trial, and only during the process will we learn what evidence the police were able to find against him. Apparently, detectives did obtain indisputable DNA evidence, as Edric was denied bail, and they have no doubt that Edric is responsible for Tara's murder, so her case is officially closed. Tara's family, who fought for the truth for 23 years, finally learned what happened to her and thanked the new team of detectives for bringing closure to the case. As for Rhonda Coleman, the other woman after whom the law was named, her case remains unsolved. However, her family can now hope that detectives will discover new evidence and hold the culprit accountable, as it happened in Tara's case. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On January 12, 2019, a report emerged regarding the death of 65-year-old Michael Redlick. He was a former NBA executive with the Memphis Grizzlies and a respected professor at the University of Central Florida. Initially believed to have died from a heart attack, it was later revealed that he had been stabbed in the chest. There were speculations about the incident, including the possibility of self-inflicted harm. Forensic experts eventually confirmed that it was a homicide, and Michael's wife was identified as the perpetrator. In June 2022, Michael's wife, Danielle Redlick, went to trial, but the case remained complex. She did not admit to premeditated murder, and her testimony changed throughout the legal proceedings. The legal battle between the prosecution and defense was intense. Danielle Redlick, a 46-year-old woman, she had a petite stature and a slender physique, with chestnut hair that had turned gray either. Before the incident, Danielle was a regular American woman, a mother of two, and a specialist in multimedia communications. She wasn't particularly well known until the crime against her husband brought her into the public eye. Danielle was born in Florida in 1976 and later moved to Cleveland, Ohio with her family. Her upbringing was typical, growing up kind and well-mannered with a personality. Her appreciation for beauty deepened as she grew older. She attended Valencia College and earned an Associate of Arts degree before joining Baldwin Wallace University's psychology department in 1996. In 1996, Danielle's mother remarried, but the marriage was short-lived due to Caitlin's passing from cancer. Caitlin had been battling breast cancer for a while and received quality medical care through her husband's insurance, but unfortunately, the treatment was unsuccessful. After her mother's death, Danielle and her siblings went to live with their stepfather, Michael Redlick. Michael later became Danielle's husband and met his tragic end in 2019. Their relationship started as a friendship and evolved over time as Danielle cared for the younger children and worked part-time jobs. Michael, focused on his career in professional sports, particularly player recruitment, grew attached to the children and developed a strong bond with Danielle. Despite their age gap, their relationship blossomed naturally. Danielle initially kept their relationship hidden from her family, but eventually revealed it. They found happiness and support in each other's company. Michael used his connections to help Danielle secure a job at an advertising agency. With his good income, he devoted all his free time to family activities. The circumstances were favorable for both of them. Mr. Redlick received a job offer as vice president of corporate sales for the Memphis Grizzlies basketball club. This new role required him to move to a different state. He asked Danielle to go with him, but she hesitated due to her studies and attachment to her current lifestyle. She declined, but they maintained their relationship long distance with frequent visits. Michael surprised Danielle by showing her the house he had bought for them, a beautiful cottage near the Mississippi River in a peaceful neighborhood. Eventually, Danielle decided to move in with him. To support her decision, Michael helped Danielle find a job in the radio industry. Looking back, Danielle remembered that everything went smoothly at first. Things only changed later due to Michael's demanding job. Years later, during a trial involving Danielle, her daughter Jaden testified about Michael's vital role as a father in raising them both. They attended prestigious schools with their father's encouragement in sports programs. Jaden had a strong bond with her father, but felt disconnected from her mother, viewing her as problematic. She believed her mother caused conflicts at home, while Michael aimed for family harmony. What caused the discord in their seemingly happy family? Michael's new job brought more responsibilities and stress, leading to a strained relationship with management. He started drinking heavily. Despite Danielle's efforts to support him, Michael's drinking led to conflicts. One significant incident occurred when Michael struck Danielle during an argument. He regretted his actions, seeking immediate medical help for Danielle's injuries. The next day, Michael made a heartfelt gesture to show his remorse and care for Danielle, who forgave him and decided not to report the incident. Despite a strict domestic violence law in the state, Danielle chose not to cause trouble for her husband, as this wasn't the first warning sign. Similar behavior had occurred before. In 2003, the Redlicks had a daughter named Jaden. A year later, they decided to formalize their relationship. Their family life seemed positive, but Michael's work issues persisted, affecting their family dynamics. 7 years later, they welcomed their son Sawyer. The situation between Michael and Danielle grew increasingly tense as Michael started drinking again, leading to more frequent conflicts. One altercation turned physical when he grabbed Danielle by the throat and pinned her against the wall, terrifying her. Unable to bear his violent behavior, Danielle left with the kids to live with her relatives, who initially disapproved of their marriage, but eventually accepted it. Michael visited frequently, asking for forgiveness and urging Danielle to return. After some time, they reconciled, but their relationship remained turbulent as they moved multiple times due to Michael's job opportunities. In 2014, both unemployed and living off savings, they faced another relocation to Indiana. While the prospect of a new home seemed promising, Danielle stayed in California with the children to handle their property sale. The constant moving took a toll on the family, especially the children, who struggled to adapt. Over about a year, their financial situation improved, but the distance strained Michael and Danielle's marriage. They communicated less and grew apart. When they reunited, new challenges arose. Danielle suspected infidelity due to Michael's distant behavior, but he revealed health issues he had been hiding. After trying various treatments, he opted for testosterone injections, revitalizing him physically and mentally, but also making him more aggressive. One night, after an incident of violence, Danielle decided to leave, but Michael begged for forgiveness. Despite the turmoil, they stayed together, raising their children. However, their relationship had changed irreversibly, leading to more conflicts and increased drinking from Michael. His discontent often turned to physical aggression, but Danielle, deeply in love, stayed. The ongoing tension affected her deeply, making her anxious and withdrawn. She found solace in photography. Despite their troubles, the family appeared normal to outsiders. By the end of the year, they settled in Florida, where Michael changed careers. His new job brought stability and joy, though less pay than before. They eventually bought a home in Winter Park, where Danielle preferred the attic to escape Michael's outbursts. Danielle struggled with alcohol addiction, while Michael supported the family. She handled household tasks and the children, isolating herself due to disputes leading to their separation in 2016. Despite this, Michael continued to financially support and visit the children. Danielle found a job at a school where new friends helped her overcome depression and regain independence. Although Michael had freedom to come and go, Danielle still interacted with him. An argument led to Danielle being hospitalized with a concussion. She stayed silent out of fear, but Michael misinterpreted her silence. During questioning, Danielle revealed that in October 2016, Michael had tried to run her over with his car, prompting her to go to the police briefly before leaving due to fear. They reconciled and moved back in together, which had tragic consequences. On January 12, 2019, a 911 call from Danielle reported Michael's apparent heart attack. Upon arrival, authorities found a suspicious scene with a strong cleaning agent smell, a pink liquid bucket, and Michael dead from a knife wound, not a heart attack as claimed. Danielle had wrist cuts, receiving medical attention before police began their investigation. Forensic analysis indicated someone else caused Michael's death, disproving self-harm. The pink liquid was diluted blood, an attempt to conceal evidence that ultimately failed, leaving visible blood splatters in the house. Furthermore, it is important to note that a large knife was found at the entrance of the kitchen, while 3 smaller knives were discovered inside the sink. After doctors confirmed that her injuries were not life-threatening, she was questioned. During the interview, she frequently changed her statements. Initially, she claimed to have thought her husband died of heart disease. Later, she stated he had taken his own life following an argument. However, the evidence refuted her claims, as it is difficult for such a wound to be self-inflicted, and individuals intending to end their lives usually choose simpler and less painful methods. The autopsy revealed that Michael died from blood loss. With timely medical help, his life could have been saved. Additionally, he had a lacerated left eye. Toxicological tests showed high levels of alcohol in his system. The investigation found that a few days before the incident, there was an argument between the spouses witnessed by their elder daughter. Michael had been drinking and burst into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding. However, their daughter Jaden intervened and took the bottle away from him. After this incident, Danielle left the house and returned once her husband had fallen asleep. According to Jaden, it was the first time she had seen such a burst of anger in her father, for which he later apologized multiple times. She still believed he was a loving and caring father, but asserted that her mother often instigated conflicts. The next day, the couple reconciled, and Michael invited his wife and children to a soccer game. However, witnesses noted that Danielle appeared upset and was virtually non-communicative that evening. The parents dropped their kids off at a friend's house for a sleepover and were left alone afterward. Later in the evening, Danielle stopped by McDonald's and returned home around 10:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, she found her husband drunk again. During dinner, Danielle received a message from an unknown man. Michael saw it bit off a piece of his hamburger, and spat it at his wife. He then attacked her and attempted to strangle her. In self-defense, Danielle grabbed the first thing she could find, a knife, and stabbed him in the chest. He fell and began to bleed profusely. The defendant claimed she immediately called emergency services but accidentally dialed the wrong number. Her actions were confirmed during the investigation. In a state of shock, she lay down next to Michael and fell asleep until morning. When asked by the prosecution why she lied during the emergency call and questioning, Mrs. Redlick said she was afraid and worried that no one would believe she acted in self-defense. There were reasons for this fear. Shortly before the incident, she had a scuffle with friends. When the police arrived, she resisted, even trying to bite one of them. She also refused to cooperate with the investigation, resulting in charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Danielle had been on probation for about a year. It was also found that the cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted. She claimed she had tried to end her life due to emotional turmoil, but the injuries were superficial and not life-threatening. Therefore, her claims were not believed. Investigators also discovered that Danielle was not a role model. After finding out about Michael's infidelities, she joined a dating site where she interacted with men and was unfaithful in retaliation. Her profile stated she was single. Analysis of messages between Michael and Danielle showed she still loved her husband. Learning of his affairs left her feeling betrayed and disillusioned. She also found out Michael planned to leave her despite his repentance and desire to mend their relationship. Danielle explained she found it difficult to understand and accept her husband's actions. She was heartbroken to realize she had devoted the best years of her life to a man who didn't appreciate her. The prosecution used the information against her in court. They argued that the crime was premeditated, committed in a fit of rage because she couldn't forgive his infidelity and the impending divorce as Mr. Redlick had planned. Neighbors confirmed her frequent fits of anger, noting that the couple often had loud arguments that sometimes turned physical. People who knew them saw Michael in a positive light, viewing him as kind and helpful. On the other hand, Danielle was perceived as quarrelsome. Video evidence displayed her irrationally attacking her husband. Friends and Michael's brother supported this portrayal. One person even remembered calling her crazy, but assured others that things would be fine if steak knives were hidden. Her lawyer argued that her actions were in self-defense, stemming from years of emotional and physical abuse. Family members who witnessed their arguments confirmed Michael's rough and emotionally abusive behavior. They were aware of his frequent physical abuse and humiliation towards her, although not in their presence. Some family members mentioned that Danielle became nervous and quick-tempered only after years of marriage. The prosecution emphasized that she left her husband to die, indicating premeditation. They pointed out that she logged into a dating app the night of the incident, suggesting hatred and resentment, possibly for financial gain. After a divorce, Danielle stood to lose part of their accumulated wealth. At the time of Michael's death, her net worth was estimated at around $1.2 million. Furthermore, it was noted that she frequently changed her statements during the investigation and potentially tampered with evidence. However, the defense argued that Mr. Redlick was a manipulator and predator. Following his first wife's death, he relentlessly pursued his stepdaughter and shaped a young woman to meet his needs. During the investigation, the prosecution offered Danielle a plea deal to admit to manslaughter, which would have resulted in only 10 years of imprisonment. She declined. Even though if found guilty of first or second-degree murder, she faced a life sentence. She kept insisting she was innocent. The trial outcome shocked everyone. On July 17, 2022, the jury gave their verdict. They found Danielle Redlick not guilty of premeditated murder. They believed her actions were in self-defense. However, they did find her guilty of tampering with evidence, for which she received a 5-year suspended sentence. Having already served 3 years, these were credited toward her sentence. On August 5, 2022, when the sentence was announced, The defendant was released in the courtroom. What do you think? Was the verdict fair, or were the jurors misled into believing Danielle's actions were justified? Dorothy Stratton, a 20-year-old model, had it all: youth allure, wealth, triumph, and a cherished partner. Dorothy was predicted to have a bright future in the limelight, but fate had different plans. Her full name was Dorothy Ruth Hoogstraten. She was born on February 28, 1960, in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Vancouver. Her parents had moved to Canada from the Netherlands a year after her birth. The Stratton family then welcomed a son named John, and 7 years later, a younger sister named Louise. The Hutton family led a simple life. Dorothy excelled academically in school, but never aspired to become a celebrity or considered a glamorous career during her childhood. All she longed for were the basic necessities that her impoverished family couldn't afford. In 1977, while still in high school, Dorothy worked as a waitress at Dairy Queen, a local fast food joint. With her blonde hair, charming face, and mature figure for her age, the 17-year-old quickly attracted attention from patrons. Both young men and older, prosperous men were captivated by her beauty. One evening, about 30 minutes before closing time at the snack bar where Dorothy worked, an intriguing young man named Paul Snider walked in. He immediately noticed the appealing young waitress. Paul made his order and handed her a large bill for payment. When Dorothy mentioned she couldn't provide change for such an amount, Paul smiled and suggested she keep the change if she agreed to go on a date with him. Without much hesitation, the girl consented. At that time, 26-year-old Paul Snider was quite well known in Vancouver. His job involved managing and scouting performers for club gigs. Catherine Paligi, often referred to as Night Butterflies, Catherine Paligi. He had numerous friends and connections throughout Canada. When Paul first saw the tall blonde with a radiant smile and graceful physique that was 17-year-old Dorothy, he knew he wanted to know more about her. He immediately recognized her immense potential. Paul took the stunning young lady out on a date, an upscale restaurant, and afterwards gifted her a red evening gown, which she later wore for her high school prom. As and Dorothy began their relationship, her parents remained unconcerned about their romance and didn't restrict their daughter from seeing a man 9 years older. A few months into their relationship, Paul started encouraging Dorothy to engage in a daring photo shoot. Initially, Dorothy was hesitant, but Paul persisted, asserting that she had excellent prospects in modeling and could earn a substantial income. Eventually, she agreed to his suggestion. Paul secured a studio, hired a professional photographer, and arranged for Dorothy to participate in a nude-themed photo shoot. Once the photos were completed, he submitted them to the editorial team of the globally renowned men's magazine Playboy. Dorothy's pictures created a sensation. A Playboy editor invited her to Los Angeles. Knowing that her parents would disapprove of such provocative work, Paul forged Dorothy's mother's signature, claiming she permitted her daughter to sign a deal with the famed magazine. In the summer of 1979, Paul and Dorothy traveled from Canada to the United States, arriving in Hollywood. By August, Dorothy Stratton had risen to fame as Playboy magazine's Playmate of the Month. Subsequently, she started working as a bunny at the Playboy Club. She admitted over the phone to friends that her new role was quite overwhelming. Unaccustomed to such limelight, she found it daunting as affluent men were smitten with her, eager to spend time with and showering praises upon her. Paul Snider was constantly by her side, offering his support. He took on roles as her manager and chauffeur, organizing photo shoots and negotiating contracts. Dorothy's existence became entirely dominated by this man. To strengthen their bond further, Paul proposed marriage. Initially uncertain about marrying him, but ultimately feeling indebted for his role in advancing her career, Dorothy consented. Dorothy realized that without Paul Snider, she would likely still be waiting tables at a snack bar, relying on tips. Her life wouldn't have taken its fairy tale turn. Her family cautioned her against marrying Paul, suspecting he was exploiting the young woman for financial gain. In 1979, the same year Paul and Dorothy tied the knot in Las Vegas, The wedding was simple, with no lavish festivities. Post-marriage, the duo remained industrious. Dorothy became involved in filming several movies, where directors acknowledged her not just for her beauty and aura, but also for her acting prowess. As Dorothy's fame and earnings escalated, she used her income to purchase a spacious home in Los Angeles. She resided there with her husband. Paul Snider was content with his wife's achievements and boasted to friends that Dorothy's rising popularity was a collective success. Acting as her manager, he was a constant presence at her shoots and events, overseeing their finances and assets. He also kept a close watch on her diet, clothing choices, alcohol intake at social gatherings, and occasionally guided her on whom to engage with intimately among influential figures to further her career. Speculations arose about Dorothy having a romantic liaison with Hugh Hefner, the chief editor of Playboy magazine. However, Hefner refuted these claims and asserted that Stratton was not a woman of loose morals. As time progressed, the model began to discern that her husband was exerting excessive control over her life. She appointed a new professional manager and started excluding Paul from photo shoots by fabricating various pretexts. The gap between the couple widened, and sensing this, Paul's mental state deteriorated. He guarded his wife with insane jealousy, even employing a private detective to monitor her movements, yet no incriminating evidence surfaced. Paul imposed restrictions on his wife's wardrobe, disallowing her from wearing provocative attire because he didn't want men who offered no financial gain to their family admiring her. He instigated conflicts and, in moments of rage, even resorted to physical abuse. Dorothy struggled to cope with her husband's aggressive outbursts, increasingly seeking distance from him. Friends and colleagues noticed the growing troubles in Paul and Dorothy's marriage. Staff at Playboy frequently advised Dorothy to end her relationship with her husband. While Dorothy was busy with photo shoots, Paul stayed at their house, using her earnings and languishing in inactivity. One day, Paul discovered that Dorothy had set up a company in her name and was actively investing in it. This strategy, suggested by her manager, was designed to ensure that in the event of a divorce, Paul Snider would not have any claims over the money. Paul's behavior escalated into creating more scandals as he realized his influence over his wife was waning. With Dorothy seldom returning home, Snider began to see that his control over what he considered his golden ticket was slipping away. In the spring of 1980, during a gathering at the Playboy Mansion, 20-year-old Dorothy met Peter Bogdanovich, a well-known 40-year-old film director and close associate of Hugh Hefner. The director was captivated by Dorothy and invited her to act in his upcoming comedy, They All Laughed. Dorothy accepted the offer to play the role of a mistress. On March 22nd, Stratton went on a solo trip to New York for filming. She misled Paul by saying that the director had prohibited anyone besides cast and crew from being present. She convinced him to stay in Los Angeles because she feared he might cause disturbances during the shoot. Additionally, Dorothy requested her manager filter calls from her overbearing husband while she was on set. During her time in New York, Dorothy found herself deeply enamored with Bogdanovich. A passionate romance blossomed between them, filling Dorothy with joy. She did not want to miss this opportunity with an influential director. As a result, her demeanor toward her husband became increasingly distant and aloof. Dorothy spent 2 months in New York. During period, Paul Snider remained alone in their expansive house in Los Angeles. Occasionally, he would bring other women home, who were surprised to find that Paul was being unfaithful to such a stunning spouse, a Playboy model. In April 1980, Dorothy returned to California for the Playboy Award ceremony. She earned the prestigious title of Playmate of the Year and graced the magazine's cover, gaining a new accolade. As part of her recognition, she received a lavish gift from Playboy, a Jaguar sports car and a cash award of $200,000. Dorothy had developed a close friendship with Hugh Hefner, the chief editor, who harbored great expectations for this rising star. After the ceremony, Dorothy embarked on a 2-week promotional tour across Canada. On weekends, she flew out for dates with director Peter Bogdanovich. She intended to spend the final days of the tour with her family in Vancouver. Upon learning this, Paul Snider immediately flew to Canada. Leveraging his past experience as a nightclub manager and his numerous connections in Vancouver, during Dorothy's brief holiday, Paul coerced her into working in clubs and pocketed all the profits. During this time, a significant altercation erupted between them. In tears, Dorothy suggested quitting her career to salvage their marriage. She proposed that they both return to her parents and start afresh. However, Snider rejected this idea. After the tour in Canada, Dorothy returned to New York and continued filming the comedy They All Laughed. She began ignoring her husband's calls and further distanced herself from him. One day, Dorothy called Paul herself and asked for more freedom in their relationship. Snider became increasingly depressed and very angry with his wife. It is known that at that time, Paul Snider was involved with a young girl who was not yet 18 years old. She had a model-like appearance, and Paul hoped to make her a new Playboy bunny. In June 1980, on their first wedding anniversary, Paul got a distressing letter from Dorothy. She mentioned wanting a divorce and said she would stop giving him financial support. This confirmed Paul's fears about her being unfaithful director Peter Bogdanovich. Paul hired a private investigator to dig up evidence of this alleged affair. One time, Paul called Dorothy's manager, threatening to cause a disturbance or maybe something even worse. The manager told Dorothy to get a bodyguard and be careful of Paul, but she ignored the advice. Paul, without a green card and facing work barriers in America, saw his finances dwindle. He started draining their joint bank accounts and sold off valuable items like collectibles, jewelry, and a Jaguar sports car that Playboy had given her. He accepted cash transactions only and often sold at big discounts. To make matters worse, Paul also rented out rooms in their large home to friends, driven partly by depression and loneliness. He began thinking about going back to Canada. In mid-July, after filming for They All Laughed ended, Dorothy and Bogdanovich went on a 10-day trip to England. They came back to Los Angeles on July 30th. Dorothy then moved into Bogdanovich's mansion in Beverly Hills. On the afternoon of July 31st, Paul borrowed a handgun from someone he knew. That night, he went to Peter Bogdanovich's house with the gun in hand. He hid nearby, determined to shoot anyone who came close to the gates of the mansion. After waiting several hours and growing impatient, Paul drove up to a mountain area overlooking Los Angeles at night. He later told a friend that during his time alone there, he was plagued by dark thoughts about ending his own life late into the night. Snider returned to their home a week later on August 3rd. Paul managed to convince Dorothy to meet him at their residence. He hoped to rekindle their relationship, reminiscent of the charm he wielded in the modest diner where they first met. However, the Dorothy who arrived was no longer the naive schoolgirl he once knew. She had transformed into a self-assured woman, no longer easily swayed by her husband's persuasions. Dorothy revealed to Paul that she loved another man and intended to divorce him. Snider, maintaining his composure, requested that she return in a week so they could calmly discuss the particulars of their separation. The following day, Paul zealously set out to purchase a firearm. He scoured shops, but his Canadian citizenship deterred sellers from transacting with him. He even asked his private investigator to procure a rifle under the pretext of self-protection and home security. However, the detective dissuaded him and declined to assist. On August 11th, Snider spotted an ad in the newspaper. A hunter was selling an old 12-gauge shotgun. He drove to the San Fernando Valley intending to inspect and potentially acquire the firearm. Unfortunately, he lost his way and failed to locate the address and had to return without it. On August 13th, 2 days later, Paul revisited the same location. This time, he successfully found the seller and purchased the aged shotgun, telling them of his plans to go hunting. On August 14th, anticipating his meeting with Dorothy, Paul Snider requested his roommates vacate the house until evening to ensure uninterrupted privacy for his conversation with his wife. Dorothy's managers and assistants urged her to let them accompany her to the meeting or handle the divorce discussions over phone calls. However, Dorothy chose to go alone. She carried a substantial amount of money with her, intending to generously express her gratitude for Paul's past contributions in her life. She aimed for a peaceful separation and hoped to maintain a cordial relationship. Believing the meeting would be brief, she scheduled a photo shoot for later that evening. Dorothy arrived at her home at noon on August 14th to meet with Paul Snider. He courteously welcomed her inside. Shortly after, her phone rang. It was a safety check call from her manager. They had pre-arranged that if Dorothy encountered any trouble, she would use a specific code word during the call. She assured the caller that all was well and quickly concluded the conversation. The discussion between Dorothy and Paul continued, but eventually escalated into a dispute. In a sudden violent outburst, Paul Snider produced a shotgun and fatally shot Dorothy in the face. It was reported that following this heinous act, Paul engaged in an act of necrophilia with his deceased wife before turning the gun on himself. At 8 p.m., the roommates returned to the house, noticing Stratton's car parked outside. Inside, they found her handbag in the living room. Assuming Paul had reconciled with his wife and they were together in the bedroom, the roommates retreated to their own room, turned on the TV, and endeavored to be as quiet as possible, not wanting to intrude on the couple's privacy. Meanwhile, Dorothy's managers became increasingly anxious as she had ceased responding to their calls. At 11 p.m., they finally managed to contact someone at Paul and Dorothy's residence. The roommates took the call and, after hanging up, decided to check the master bedroom. There, they stumbled upon a gruesome sight. Both Dorothy and Paul were found dead. Forensic specialists concluded that 20-year-old Dorothy Stratton died approximately 1 hour after her arrival at the house. Her 29-year-old husband, Paul Snider, died about an hour following his wife's death. Hugh Hefner was among the first to be informed of this tragic event. He took it upon himself to contact his friend, Peter Bogdanovich, to relay the devastating news. Upon hearing about Dorothy's death, Bogdanovich was so overwhelmed that he fainted. Following this tragic event, he found himself relying on sedatives for an extended period to cope with the overwhelming shock and profound grief. The August edition of Playboy magazine had already been sent to the printers, making any last-minute changes impossible. Consequently, it featured Dorothy Stratton, who had sadly passed away. However, for their annual Playboy calendar, her image was replaced with that of another model. Hugh Hefner shared his thoughts on the somber incident, remarking, "There's a stereotype that a poor girl from a small town makes it to the pages of a magazine, moves to Hollywood, builds a dazzling career, and then dies tragically at the height of her powers. But it's not always the case." Paul Snider was a disturbed individual who realized his fortunate ticket was slipping away, which drove him to commit this horrible act. Peter Bogdanovich took charge of organizing and funding Dorothy Stratton's funeral. The loss deeply affected him, thus he opted for cremation. Her remains were interred in a cemetery in Los Angeles. Following the tragic death of the model, the film studio decided not to release They All Laughed. Determined to ensure it would see the light of day, Bogdanovich acquired the film rights using his finances. Eventually, the comedy They All Laughed was released. In 1981, despite considerable efforts, the film did not achieve any notable accolades and failed to capture the audience's interest. This commercial failure led Bogdanovich to lose millions and ultimately resulted in his declaration of bankruptcy. Several years after Dorothy Stratton's passing, rumors emerged about director Peter Bogdanovich secretly meeting her younger sister, Louise Stratton, who was 13 at the time. The Stratton family strongly denied these claims and legally contested the spread of such rumors. However, in 1988, 8 years later, the 49-year-old Bogdanovich married the 20-year-old Louise Stratton. Louise later mentioned in interviews that their romance began when she was 18. The marriage of Peter Bogdanovich and Louise Stratton lasted for 13 years, ending in divorce in 2001. Peter never remarried. He dedicated his life to his cinematic endeavors and passed away in 2022 at the age of 82. Louise Stratton now resides in her hometown of Vancouver and is pursuing a career as a Canadian actress and producer. Over 4 decades since Dorothy Stratton's murder, her life and story have continued to inspire various creative works, including films, books, and songs. A recent tribute to her can be seen in the crime drama series Welcome to Chippendales, which chronicles the story of the famed male strip dance group Chippendales, co-founded by Paul Snider. In this series, Dorothy Stratton is portrayed by Nicola Peltz, who is married into the Beckham family. Known to her friends and family as Alex, Alexandra Morgan was a single mother of 2 children, who were 4 and 11 years old at the time. They lived in Wilsley Pound, Cranbrook, Kent. She did not maintain relationships with the fathers of her children. It was certainly not easy for her to raise them alone. According to some sources, Alexandra worked as a dog groomer. People described her as an energetic and ambitious woman who wanted her children to have everything they needed. She wanted a better life for them and took several steps to achieve this. On November 13, 2021, Alexandra arranged a meeting with her parents. She left her 2 children with them, saying she was going on a spa vacation with friends. She told them she would be back in 3 days. On November 17th, Alexandra's parents became concerned after she didn't pick up her children. She didn't answer any calls or texts. It wasn't like her. After several unsuccessful attempts to find out where their daughter had disappeared, the parents had to contact the police. Kent police said there was something strange about Alexandra Morgan's disappearance, so they treated it as a potential crime. At the beginning of the investigation, the police tried to find out which spa Alexandra planned to go to. She told her parents she was going there with friends, and the police wanted to know who those friends were. At that time, the investigators could not even think what they would have to face while searching for Alexandra. The police obtained footage from a gas station in Cranbrook, trying to locate the woman. It was the last place people saw her. Her white Mini Cooper was the key to establishing her whereabouts. On the morning of November 14th, she refueled her car, bought some goods, and left. At first glance, there's nothing unusual in this video. The gas station manager, Rose McCauley, who has been on friendly terms with Alexandra for 17 years, was there when she bought 10 pounds worth of gas and ordered a coffee and a snack on the morning of her disappearance. Rose said, "I don't think anybody knows what's happened to her or where she's gone. For her car not to be seen at all since then is a complete mystery. A friend and I went around Hastings looking for it but didn't find anything. Alex never gets embarrassed, so I don't think it's a case of her being afraid to come home. I just hope nothing bad has happened to her. I just hope she's okay and turns up. It's really worrying." Alex was really dolled up with a full face of makeup, her hair done, and wearing nice clothes when she came in that Sunday looking very well presented. She was more done up than I've ever seen her before. And she came in very early in the morning, which was unlike her. Alex seemed in a good mood and was smiling. Interviewing Alexandra's friends, the detectives learned that in 2018, she posted information on her social networks about a stalker following her every move. In another post from 2019, she shared an image with the words, "Hi stalker." Alexandra wrote, "Stop stalking my page, lovelies. It's quite sad. Not only that, but you making it more obvious by the day, seeing as we are not even friends on Facebook. Nothing to see here, pal, unless I want you to. If you carry on, I'll post your antics for all to see. Have a lovely day." Now investigators were trying to discover if these messages had anything to do with her disappearance. A police spokesman said, "It is completely out of character for Alexandra not to contact her family, and we are now treating this case as a potential murder. While we continue our investigation, I would urge anyone who may have seen Alexandra or her white Mini Cooper with a black roof to contact us. If you think you may have seen Alexandra or something suspicious but are not sure, please do not hesitate to call and let us know." They described Alexandra as a woman around 5 feet 6 inches tall, with a slim build and brown shoulder-length hair. She was wearing a green knee-length quilted coat, a black top, ripped blue jeans, knee-high black boots, and a silver necklace when last seen. Sometimes people disappear without leaving any traces or clues helpful to the police. Many missing person cases remain unsolved, but this time, everything was different. Alexandra Morgan left a digital footprint that eventually allowed the police to find out what happened to her. Moreover, it revealed some shocking secrets. Alexandra wanted to improve her financial situation. Trying to do this, she started working as an escort, advertising her services on the internet. However, her family and friends didn't know about it. Women working as escorts are among the most vulnerable category of people. It's no secret to anyone, including the police. They never know who will be their next client, an ordinary person who, for some reason, decided to pay for such services, or a maniac looking for a victim. The investigators discovered that Alexandra arranged a meeting with her regular client before her disappearance. They arrested this man. At the same time, the statement made by the police representative made it clear that Alexandra was, unfortunately, no longer alive. A spokesperson for Kent Police said, "Detectives from the Kent and Essex Serious Crime Directorate investigating the disappearance of a woman from Sissinghurst have arrested a man. On Thursday, November 25, 2021, a 40-year-old man from St. Leonards-on-Sea was arrested on suspicion of murder." Kent police officers, with support from Sussex Police, are carrying out searches in 3 locations in the Hastings and St. Leonards-on-Sea area as part of their work to locate Alexandra. Residents can expect to see a heightened police presence in the area as inquiries continue. The man they arrested was Mark Brown. He was a construction worker, was married, and had a son. His family did not suspect that he was leading a double life. Before her disappearance, Alexandra had met with him several times. According to Sussex Police, he once bought her a Mini Cooper. Their first meeting was on June 8, 2021, after Brown saw her on an adult website. It was at her home in Sissinghurst, near Cranbrook, Kent. Everything went well that time, and they continued to see each other occasionally. On June 21st, almost 2 weeks later, they met for the second time. However, now Alexandra went to Littlebridge Farm, near Hastings, Kent, which Brown rented for meetings with women and other purposes. During August and September, they met 7 more times, and Alexandra did not suspect that she was falling more and more into a trap. On October 23, 2021, Brown sent her a text message asking if she would be interested in a risk-free business transaction he was offering. The proposal referred to £100,000, 3 5-days at a hotel he would be guarding, a new ID, a straight car, and shopping money. All he needed her to do was go out for a cigarette, bag up cash, and buy some things. Testament to her character, online searches made by Alexandra after this proposal showed that she was keen to better the lives of her children. One of these searches was minimum deposit for a house 2021. A selection of other searches showed Alexandra's intention to form new businesses with the money she would make. Among the internet searches made were, "How much can you earn running a sunbed shop UK?" and "How much tax would I pay on 100,000?" When Alexandra told her parents about going to the spa with her friends, she was actually planning to meet Mark Brown at the farm. She left the house on November 14th, and CCTV footage captured her buying gas in Cranbrook at 7:20 a.m. She arrived at Littlebridge Farm around 8 a.m. 3 days later, on November 17th, Brown moved Alexandra's car to Holmhurst Lane, St. Leonards, having previously switched her license plate with a fake one. On November 18th, Alexandra's mother went to the police after her daughter did not pick up the children and stopped answering calls and texts. On November 23rd, the police found CCTV footage showing Alexandra's car following Brown's Jaguar on the road to Littlebridge Farm. Kent Police blocked access to the farm and started asking Brown questions. He admitted that he had met with Alexandra. However, he said she left after 45 minutes. He said the police could take his fingerprints and a DNA sample. 2 days later, on November 25th, they arrested Brown as the main suspect in the Alexandra Morgan case. But before we continue, and before I tell you what happened to her, we need to go back to when Alexandra didn't know Mark Brown yet. Leah Ware was 33 years old, mother of 3. However, she did not have custody of her children. Leah was an animal lover devoted to her horse, 3 goats, and 2 dogs, a mastiff called Duke and a Pomeranian named Lady. Leah had come to know Mark Brown on March 25, 2018, when he reached out to her on an escort website where she advertised her services. It was the same website where Brown would meet Alexandra Morgan a few years later. By the end of 2018, Brown and Ware had started dating and renting an apartment together. When the lease expired 6 months later, she moved into Brown's yard at Little Bridge Farm, where she lived in a shipping container. Brown described their relationship as a roller coaster. As it became known, Leah led a chaotic lifestyle. She was a benefit claimant and received weekly payments into her account, which were often withdrawn for her by Brown. She did have a history of illegal substance use and mental health illness. Yet many people said she was working hard to get custody of her children. When describing her daughter, Leah's mom said, "She was an angel, really." She added that though Leah was never fond of school, she had always preferred her animals. Brown and Ware's relationship lasted 3 years before she disappeared without a trace in May 2021. Leah spent the evening of May 5th and the early hours of May 6th with a friend and convicted dealer of illegal substances, Jack Tyler. They took those substances together. That evening, there was an intimate relationship between them. It was the last time anyone saw Leah. The last outgoing call made from her phone was on May 7th at 8:55 a.m. The police believed that she died on that day. 2 weeks later, Mark Brown returned to the website where he met Leah. On June 8, 2021, a month after she disappeared without a trace, Alexandra met Brown for the first time at her home. Their meeting went well. She saw Brown as a reasonable and generous man, but Alexandra had no idea that just a month ago, another woman who was in a relationship with Brown disappeared without a trace. During the investigation, the detectives found very revealing messages sent by Brown. He wrote them to his high school girlfriend 5 days after he met Alexandra Morgan. However, these messages were not about Alexandra. They were about Leah Ware. Here's what they said. "I'm going to be very careful how I word this. It happened again, not very long ago when disposing of something. It's a very unpleasant thing to do. An old oil drum, 5 liters of diesel, and hey presto, there's not very much left. It gets hot, very hot. It glows almost white. The things I have done weigh heavily on my heart, on my head, and my soul. A psychopath with a conscience. It's a joke, really." Thus, investigators started suspecting that Alexandra Morgan was dead, and more frighteningly, that she was not the only victim of Mark Brown. A spokesperson for Sussex Police Major Crime Team said, "Despite extensive investigations, we have not found Leah or her body and are appealing for the help of the public to try to locate her or anything connected with her disappearance." After Brown's arrest on November 25, 2021, the police searched his farm. There, they found a barrel inside which someone had recently burned something. Examining its contents, experts found the remains of bones and teeth. Laboratory examination left no doubt that these were the remains of Alexandra Morgan. In a joint statement, Neil Kimber of Kent Police and Andy Wolstenholme from Sussex Police said, "Our thoughts are with the families of both Alexandra and Leah at this difficult time. Whilst we have located the remains of Alexandra, we have yet to find Leah, and our investigations remain ongoing. We are appealing for anyone with information regarding either Leah or Alexandra to contact us urgently." Police described Leah as a 5 feet, 6 and tall white female of slim build with very long black hair and blue eyes. They said she possibly had tattoos of a dragon on her right leg, Chinese writing on her right hip, and a fairy sitting on a flower over the name Ryan on her right leg. The search at Brown's farm lasted about a month, ending on January 7, 2022. In the pond, the police found the bones of a Pomeranian with some weight tied to a collar. Investigators believed it was Leah's dog, which Brown so cruelly got rid of following the death of Leah herself. Although police were unable to find Leah Ware's remains, they still charged Brown with taking her life on February 1, 2022. Earlier, they charged him with taking the life of Alexandra Morgan. During the interrogation, Brown denied the charges against him. However, when they informed him of the evidence indicating that he had disposed of Alexandra Morgan's body by fire, he admitted her death. Yet, Brown was adamant that Alexandra had died as a result of an accident. The trial of Mark Brown began on October 17, 2022. New details of these two cases became known during the court sessions. The jury learned that Brown regularly withdrew money from Leah Ware's bank account after her disappearance. After Leah's disappearance on May 7, 2021, Brown collected her prescription medication and withdrew money at a cash point using her new bank card every week. They delivered the card to the address of his sister Cheryl. He would then leave the cash and medication in a horse box belonging to their pet, Birdie. Prosecution lawyer Duncan Atkinson detailed a number of times in the weeks after Leah Ware's disappearance when Brown took £200 from her account, the maximum allowed in a transaction. This led to Leah's balance falling from more than £2,000 to £45, jurors were told. In July 2021, Brown twice withdrew £200 from Leah Ware's account. Shortly after, he transferred £200 to his account. When asked why he did this, he said, "I probably used her £200, then replaced it. At that time, someone owed me £430, so they probably paid me back." Atkinson said, "The reality is the withdrawals of money from Leah Ware's account had nothing to do with her and everything to do with you. Is it a coincidence she died after her new bank card arrived?" Brown replied, "I don't know what you're getting at because as far as I'm aware, she's not dead." Atkinson asked, "You were running off Ms. Ware's money, weren't you? You knew Leah was somewhere where money wasn't going to help her." Brown replied, "I don't know what planet you're living on." Leah wanted Brown to leave his wife for her. One of her friends said this during testimony at the trial. Perhaps it played some role in Brown's decision to commit this crime. During the trial related to Alexandra Morgan's death, Brown reiterated that her death was an accident. He claimed that Alexandra slipped and fell on some tool, hitting her head, in the workshop he rented at Little Bridge Farm. He said he ran over to her and saw there was a lot of blood. Therefore, he got a towel to try to stop the bleeding from her head. When he moved her head to place the towel under it, there was even more blood. Prosecution lawyer Duncan Atkinson objected, saying, "When you first saw she's gone to the ground on her back, there's already a lot of blood around her head, so it's clear before you do anything else that she's hurt and needs help and needs a doctor. That's absolutely obvious." Brown replied, "Yes, but I was panicked and the first thing I did was grab a towel to stop the bleeding. At that point, she was gone, and it was my priority to try and do CPR because I couldn't find a pulse. I didn't call an ambulance because my priority was to try and stop the bleeding and then to get a pulse. There's no point calling an ambulance if it's not going to get there on time. Your priority is to stop the bleeding." After attempting CPR and holding a mirror to Alexandra Morgan's mouth and nose to check for breath, Brown said he was sure she had died. In the 5 minutes or so after that, he used jumpers to stop blood flowing out from under the workshop door, went outside to vomit, and retrieved his mobile phone from either his car or jacket pocket to call the emergency services. He then decided to cover the whole thing up, saying, "I wrapped Alex in a sleeping bag and put a towel around her head to stop more blood coming out. I had a dead escort on my workshop floor. What would it look like? How would I prove she had an accident? It was a stupid thing to do. It was the worst mistake I ever made in my life." Brown then decided to dispose of Alexandra's body using an incinerator he had fashioned out of an old oil drum earlier that year and used regularly to burn waste. He said, "I'd heard urban legends about people burning bodies, and I didn't want anyone to come across a body dumped somewhere." Thus, Brown claimed that he had nothing to do with the disappearance of Leah Ware and believed that she was alive, and Alexandra's death was allegedly an accident. However, during the trial, the court heard the testimony of Brown's boss, Alan Downs. The man said Brown warned him that the police might come for him and arrest him. This conversation took place on November 24th. When Downs asked what the police might arrest him for, Brown replied, "For a double murder." And this was a crucial point. With this answer, Brown indirectly admitted that Leah Ware was dead and that Alexandra Morgan did not die as a result of an accident. However, Brown denied saying such words. He said, "No, I said I'm going away for 25 to life. I don't know where he got double from. I said I would be arrested for one murder. I didn't say double." Atkinson said, "When asked, 'Who have you killed?' the answer should have been no one." Brown replied, "It should have been, yes, but that's not what I thought was going to happen. I can't prove I didn't kill Alex, and I didn't think anyone would believe me. That's why I did what I did." They were both mums, daughters, and much more to their family and friends, and both lost their lives in the cruelest of circumstances. Both fell into the trap of an evil maniac. They left behind children and devastated families. Throughout the murder trial at Hove Crown Court, jurors learned about the lives of both Leah Ware and Alex Morgan, from their upbringings to their children and relationships, their work, and their passions. Jurors also heard attempts from Brown to, as the prosecutor once put it, blacken their names, painting a false picture of the women. The memories of Leah Ware and Alex Morgan smiling and enjoying life should be what people remember about them. Both deserve to remain in the memories of their loved ones for their numerous qualities. On December 1st, 2022, a jury of 10 men and 2 women found 41-year-old Brown guilty on all counts. Judge Nicholas Hilliard said, "This is clearly a case of the utmost gravity, and the effect on the victims' families must be absolutely devastating." He said the court would sentence Brown to life in prison, and he would have to decide the minimum prison term, or indeed consider if he will ever be released for parole license. The judge also said that if Brown decided to tell what he had done with Leah Ware's body, he would take it into account during sentencing. However, Brown did not take this chance. Before the judge passed down his sentence, the court heard a victim impact statement from Leah Ware's mother, Rebecca Martin. She said, "Brown continues to extend his sadistic torture of our family's life by not telling us what happened to her. She lost her life because Mark Brown wanted to gratify his depraved desires. He controlled and manipulated every aspect of her life, and then when he had had enough, he discarded her like a piece of dirt." The court also heard from Alex Morgan's parents, who said she was bright and energetic, with a determination to succeed. She had challenges, but she was overcoming them and had hopes for her future with her 2 children who she adored. On January 13, 2023, the court sentenced Mark Brown to 2 life sentences. He will be able to apply for parole in 49 years. Judge Hilliard, who sentenced Brown in his absence after he refused to come to the court, said, "No sentence I pass is any measure of the lives lost. Nothing can put right what the defendant has done. That is not possible. His conscience is untroubled by what he has done." Every relationship of a person is based on the pillar of trust, whether it's between parents and children, husband and wife, or even between boyfriend and girlfriend. But if someone breaks the trust of another person in these essential relationships and starts thinking badly about them, it feels really terrible. And today's case is somewhat similar, where a boy and a girl from Pakistan were very happy in their relationship. But then, after some time, the girl breaks up because she started seeing a dog side of her boyfriend. But then, what the boy did with his girlfriend shook the entire Pakistan. Shaukat Ali Muqaddam was not only a normal citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador of Pakistan. Due to this, he had to live in different countries. However, in 2021, he was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. Apart from this, at one point, Shaukat Ali had also been Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan. Because of this, he held a very high position in Pakistan. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shaukat Muqaddam, his wife Kausar Muqaddam, 2 daughters, and 1 son. October 23, 1993, was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shaukat Ali's house, whom they named Noor. Noor was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shaukat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, he spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Noor had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Shaukat Muqaddam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Noor started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan, but Noor thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, after the US, Noor returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Noor was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Noor and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Noor loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Noor belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Noor was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent, and confident girl. Along with all these things, Noor also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Shaukat Muqaddam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Noor met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Noor are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zakir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the Jaffer family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses, including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO, while his father, Zakir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed, and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself was an introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Noor, and he likes her, and Noor also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties, but friendship between Noor and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love, and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Noor were dating. Both families were happy because Noor completes Zahir and Zahir completes Noor. Actually, Noor brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Noor, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people, and at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Noor, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves, and their families were also very happy. But then, after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Noor. Actually, Noor later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Noor several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, when Noor couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship. Because neither of them was a normal family, and in such affluent households, it's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Noor left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Before moving forward, quickly subscribe to the channel. This is strange. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Quickly subscribe to it. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Noor just once, so he called Noor on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Noor was at her home, preparing for Eid with her family. Now, Zahir called Noor and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again, but I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Noor, "Come to my house, we'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Noor to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Noor leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Noor arrives outside Zahir's house at the scent location in Sector F74. But strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, "What would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen?" Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time, Noor was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jathar's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes." However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is cancelled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now, after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now, the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes, and then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Noor was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Noor during the car ride, but Noor wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffar's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Noor got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Noor wasn't supposed to go back inside the house with Zahir. but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then, on July 19th, Noor stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Noor had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m., but now it had been more than 24 hours, and Noor's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours, at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Shaukat Muqaddam texts his daughter, asking her where she is. However, Noor doesn't reply to that text message. Then, at 5:48 a.m., Noor's mother messages her, and two family friends also call Noor, yet there is no response from Noor. This causes worry for Noor's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Noor sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Noor's mother, Kausar Muqaddam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Noor's mother from his own phone and tells her that Noor is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Noor. Then, from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father, Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Noor is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Noor is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Noor and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Noor falls down, but Zahir drags her inside. Now, I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Noor inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener. But none of them helped Noor. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Noor attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Noor was always caught. But this time, because of Noor's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Noor back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes, because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Noor with his handgun, but as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Noor. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Noor's body. Meanwhile, Noor scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails, but after some time, Noor's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Noor was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabs Noor by the throat and keeps squeezing until Noor's last breath is gone. Later, Noor's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen, but before killing Noor, Zahir raped her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Noor's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Noor's throat, and finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Noor, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends, saying, "Thieves have broken into our house, and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked, named Therapy Works, and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Noor's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zahur, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and, with his employees, entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife, piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Noor's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now, everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir, and after seeing Noor's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert, because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there, and then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Shaukat Muqaddam to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Muqaddam's family home was engulfed in mourning because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Noor's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir according to Pakistan law, meaning the death penalty. After that, the police arrested Zahir, but now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Noor, and he had done so because he loved Noor very much. He had even proposed marriage to Noor, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Noor's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Noor agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Noor didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July 18th to 20th, Zahir tried to convince Noor for marriage, but when Noor refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Noor, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police, because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable, and because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Noor. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced, and secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaves strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Noor, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Noor. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Noor received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties, one for physically assaulting Noor and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Mohammed Jan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Noor, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Noor Muqaddam murder case comes to an end right here. If you appreciate our efforts, like and share this video. If you haven't subscribed, do so now. Thank you.